Testing.
All right.
Ready?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to convene the June 5th meeting of the City Commission of Oregon City. Convene the meeting and ask for a roll call.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith. Here. Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Present.
Mayor Dan Holliday is absent this evening. And Commission President Frank O'Donnell.
Here. Before we start the meeting, I ask everybody to check their cell phones and shut them off or silence them, please. And I also ask you to join me in the flag salute. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first item is item 3A, 19-343, a 2020 census update by Sarah Bashur. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, please tell me. You're going to present this. Did I say your name correctly?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for allowing us to attend the meeting today. My name is Sarah, and I work with the U.S. Census Bureau. We also have with us today Mark Chorney. He has been with us for about a week now, and this is part of his training.
We've got a lot of questions for you.
Oh, boy.
Let him go first.
Oh, dear.
The program that we're going to be doing tonight is called The Road to 2020. It has to do with the decennial census. Why do we do the census? It's actually part of the Constitution. The Constitution requires that we do a census every 10 years. Why do we do it? For the House of Representatives, the 435 seats. Also included with that is the electoral colleges and other things that are involved at the federal level. Once this information is transmitted to the president, then it also goes to all the governors, and then redistricting occurs down at the state levels as well. The main reason why the census is important to us today has to do with the funding. Every year, over $883 billion goes back to the states. Of that, Oregon's share is $13.5 billion. That's a per capita estimate of about $3,200 per person. Right now, we're handing out how that money is actually spent. The money goes towards Section 8 housing, the WIC program, SNAP, roads, hospitals, everything you can think of, but there is a breakdown of it, and this is all based upon funding from 2016. That's the latest material that we have. It comes from George Washington University. But that really is the big reason why the census is important, particularly to the state of Oregon. If we didn't have that $13.5 billion, we would be in very bad shape when it comes to a lot of social services, roads, hospitals, etc. Our goal with the 2020 census is to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. It can be a very daunting task. Just so that you're aware of it, we count the households and we count the people. We expect that there's going to be over 330 million people will be counted in the 2020 census. There are significant changes that will be occurring with the census next year. Number one is that we're going to be trying to use the internet as much as possible. We're going to ask people to self-report by going over their computer, their laptop, their smartphone. If they need to go to the local library, we've got systems already set up statewide with the library system so that people can use the internet to self-report. If they don't want to use the internet for whatever reason, we're going to have toll-free numbers available so people can call in. If you don't want to use the internet, you don't want to use the phone, then you can do the questionnaire. And this year we expect it's going to either have 10 or 11 questions on it. So let's just talk a little bit about the self-reporting that happens. In March of 2020, we're going to send out what we call an invitation to self-report. It's a little postcard that's going to come, and you'll be able to go over the internet or over the phone and do the self-reporting. If you don't respond the first time, we're going to send you the invitation again, and then again, and then again, and again. We're going to send it to you 5 times because that is the most cost-effective way for us to do business. On the 4th time that we send out the information, we'll actually include the short form. So the first 3 times, it's just asking you to do it over the internet, over the phone. The 4th time, it's going to be, the paper will come out. And the 5th time, it's basically going to say, if you don't do this very quickly, we're going to send out an enumerator to knock on your door, and we'll get the information in person. Any questions so far?
Sure. The concern that I've heard from a lot of people considering what just happened to the city of Baltimore is how secure is that going to be?
We have met all of the requirements that are used, for example, by NSA, FBI, all the federal requirements for the security of the system. And I assume that's what you're talking about, the system itself. But just so that you're aware, when someone goes in, whether it's over the phone or over the internet, that information is coming in over the internet, but then it is physically removed and it goes into our database that is not internet accessible. So I don't know if it's going to be once a day, twice a day. It depends upon the frequency of how often people are self-reporting. But the information will actually be removed from you won't have access to it over the internet. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it was mostly for the public.
Yes. The languages. Whether you go over the internet or you call, we have 12 languages available. So if you go over the internet, the first thing you're going to see is a drop-down screen, and it's going to have 12 languages that you can pick from to self-report. Or if you go over the phone, you can say, for example, you can even say it in Polish that you want to be able to speak to someone, and we'll have a Polish speaker help you with the self-reporting. The paper form will be available both in Spanish and English, and the enumerators, which is a fancy term for a census taker, will have an additional 59 languages in language cards. Did you have a question? Sorry. Okay. What do we ask? I'm going to give you a little flyer about what we ask because it can really get into great detail, but let's just go through question number 9, whether someone lives somewhere else. For example, if you have a college student who lives in a dorm, most of the time, the college student lives in a dorm, and so we will do group enumeration, and we will count the individual as living in a dorm. So you would not count that person living at your house because most of that time, the person does not live in your house. And that's really kind of the guiding force for how you determine who gets counted and who doesn't and where it is. It's where do you live most of the time. For example, if you live here most of the time, but you have a home down in Lincoln City, you're still going to do the self-reporting from here because that's just a vacation home. You might want to, when you do the self-reporting, also point out that you have an address in Lincoln City that is vacant because you're not living there. So that would be the standard rule that we would use is where do you live most of the time? There is one unusual exception to that. If you're in jail for even one night, we will count you under group enumeration if you are in jail on April 1st. So I'd strongly suggest that you not go to jail on April 1st because then you won't get counted in your city.
Well, we got jail here, so.
But then it might work. You might want to arrest a bunch of people.
Looking at the audience, that's an important thing to note.
Are you looking at anybody in particular?
Our information is private and confidential. Everything that is personally identifiable is maintained in our records only. We do not give out personally identifiable information. That's really important to understand that we cannot take our information and give it to another law enforcement agency, for example. It is prohibited under Title 13. Anyone who works for the census is a federal employee, and we sign an oath of office, and we also raise our hand for the oath of office that says that we will not give out any information that we gather during the stage when we're gathering the information for the census.
Why did the citizenship question have an asterisk next to it?
Because we're not sure if it's going to be on there. It's still before the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's been argued.
It's being argued, and we're just waiting for the decision.
Okay, I thought it was. Thank you.
I do want to point out to you just very quickly that during World War II in Oregon, the census did give personally identifiable information about Japanese Americans, and those Japanese Americans were interned because of that. And then to compound the situation, the Census Bureau lied and said that we didn't do it. We found out later through Freedom of Information Act, and one of the presidents actually apologized for the actions. So at that time, when DOD asked for the information, it was a lawful request, and there was nothing to prohibit us from giving that information out, and we did give it out. It may not have been the ethical or moral thing to do, but that's what we did, and particularly since we lied about it. It was shortly after that, approximately 2 years later, that Congress tightened Title 13 so that we can no longer give out that information. So at the time when we gave it out, it was legal for us to give it out. Let's just move forward very quickly to 9/11. The same type of thing happened again. Many of the law enforcement agencies asked for information, personally identifiable information about Arab Americans. We refused to give out the information, and it was upheld that we would not give out that information because it was personally identifiable. There was some concern, though, that we did give out information that can be found over the internet, and you'll see some of that information that I'll be going through later with you, that there is information that is done at a census level that talks about the backgrounds of people, languages that they speak, so on and so forth, but that information is available to everyone. Hard to count populations. This is the thing that is most important about the census. Approximately 80% of all Americans or all people who live in the United States. And it's important to point out that we are counting all persons. It doesn't matter if they're a U.S. citizen. It doesn't matter what their gender is. If you are in the United States and if you live in the United States, then we need to count you because that's what the Constitution says, okay? But let's look at who the hard to count populations are. Approximately 20% of all people living in the United States will not respond to the 5 mailers that we've sent out. We call that the hard to count populations. If you look at it demographically, it's made up of seniors, renters, children under 5, homeless, migrant workers, foreign-born immigrants, and then people who have low internet access. So let's go through and look at these. First, let's look at the state of Oregon. By 2020, we're actually going to have about 4.2 million people. Clackamas County in 2018 has 416,000. Oregon City, and this is based upon 2017, which is the last time that the census actually did the information, we had approximately 35,000. Now, some of you may be familiar with Portland State and their population research. Their numbers are going to be higher because they have more current numbers than us. But when it all comes down to it, when you talk to Jason or the other people that are there, our numbers are within 1% of their numbers when we actually compare them. So the first group that we're going to be looking at are seniors. Approximately 16% of the people living in Oregon City are seniors, and many of them will not self-report because of feelings of isolation, maybe mental health issues, feelings they don't matter, or just their ability to or access to the internet. We're going to ask that we work with your senior citizen centers, Meals on Wheels, and other community-based organizations that reach out to senior citizens to make sure that they get the message that it's important for them to self-report. We'll actually have things set up at the library, so if they go in, we'll have people there who can assist them with completing the self-reporting. Anyone can assist with self-reporting. If you have an elderly father, for example, it is not like voting where you can only go in the voting booth just yourself. Anyone can assist someone with self-reporting. Children under 5, your demographic here is actually a little higher than it is statewide. Statewide, it's about 4 to 5%. You're at almost 7%. Now, what are the issues with the children? Split custody. Some parents, if the parents are divorced, they may think that each of them is supposed to report, or they may neither one report. So you could have an undercount or an undercount. Children living in age-restricted housing. For example, the over 55 housing that is available in many places. What we have found is that many children are being raised by their grandparents, and their grandparents may live in age-restricted housing. The grandparent is apprehensive about indicating that their grandchildren live there. Or they may live somewhere that's supposed to be just an adult-only community, and they're afraid that we might tell the landlord that there are children living there. We don't do that. We don't make any value judgments, and we don't report anything to anyone. If an enumerator were to think that there was a problem and there was something imminent that may happen, the only person they would report to is their supervisor. We do not report to law enforcement at the local level. If it has to be done, we will come up with another way of doing it. But the child or the person would have to be in imminent danger for us to do anything. We do not view imminent danger, for example, if you have a family of 5 living under a bridge and it's winter and very cold, we do not view that as imminent danger, okay? Any questions on that? The other issue as to why children under 5 don't get counted, as an example, might be that you have a single parent who may have 2 or 3 children. If the single parent doesn't respond, then the byproduct is those 2 or 3 children don't get counted either. Renters. Your demographic here is really good. 31% renters is very low. Generally, it's about 60-40. And so you're in pretty good shape here with almost 70% home ownership. So that means most people that own homes will do the self-reporting. So that's really good news. In fact, all in all, your demographics for your city are incredibly good. I was really surprised. I think you guys are the best I've seen so far, actually. And I've seen a lot. The issues have to do with renters, has to do with their more transient nature, frequent movers. There potentially could be less community involvement or apathy, and that's why renters tend not to self-report. The homeless count, we don't do anything as far as in the actual cities at this point in time for demographics, but in Clackamas County for 2017 was about 497. For those of you who are not familiar with point in time, it's a huge undercount of people. The form that has to be completed is very labor intensive. If you're trying to interview someone who is homeless and you're asking them very intimate questions about their sexuality, for example, they tend to walk away. They don't want to answer those questions. And so the information that Point in Time gathers, which is sent to HUD so that we can get reimbursed for the homeless, it's a huge undercount. We know that. But what we do know that in 2010, there were only 22 homeless people counted in Clackamas County. We know it's gone up since 2010.
So it's to our benefit to maximize that count, make it as accurate as possible for assistance from HUD in the future. Mm-hmm. And are you enlisting any help in those organizations within this community that serve that population of transients?
Yes, we do. And we'll be talking more about that as we get closer.
Okay.
And we've already talked with Washington County about it as well. Except not Washington County, Clackamas County as well. Sorry.
Okay.
The migrant workers in Clackamas County. This is from Oregon State University, and they counted 2,062 migrant workers in 2017. The study came out in 2018, and that's the most recent figures that we have. Migrant workers tend to be Hispanic in nature, and they are very family-centered. So if we have not included family members there in that 2,000 figure, we would have to expect the figure is probably closer to 4,000, just as a demographic when you take into account the family members. Foreign-born citizens, this is going to be our biggest issue. The not a U.S. citizens, you have approximately 726 not U.S. citizens living here. They still need to be counted, and they are worth roughly $3,200 a person when we look at the census count. So it's important that we count everyone. But also the naturalized residents, most of them do not understand about the census, that it is required under our Constitution. Many other countries throughout the world do not do the census like we do. They have their own methods that they use. So we need to be able to get to both naturalized residents and people that are not U.S. citizens to make sure that they both get counted, because those people are using your resources, whether it be your roads, your hospitals, or your school lunch programs. They are using the programs, and we need to get reimbursed for we need to get reimbursed for the money that is going towards those programs. The biggest issues obviously are going to be language, fear. I'm afraid that we might send ICE in there, which we don't do. But the main thing is most of them are unaware of the constitutional requirement that we have to count everyone every 10 years. Low internet access. 2020 marks the first time that the internet and phone options are available for self-reporting. There's a lot of issues that are going to surface because of this. Familiarity with the internet, accessibility, the systems itself, the security of it, like you mentioned, and trust with the information. So the internet, although it's the most cost-effective way for us to do the census, it is also fraught with problems as far as making sure that people are comfortable wanting to use the internet. The state of Oregon. This is a program that we use. It's called Rome, and it talks about where the hard to count is located. The upper blue that you see, the darker the blue, the more likely to have an undercount. And that is part of Clackamas County. However, that is only 137 people in that upper blue corner. So that's not really very realistic when you look at all of Clackamas County. That lower blue area is actually Warm Springs Indian Reservation. And there's approximately 3,900 people just in that block that are hard to count. And so we have to look at ways to be able to reach them. We have a tribal specialist, for example, who will be working on the Warm Springs Indian Reservation. And the other blue areas that you see, and I'll bring up Oregon City. See, this is why I was so happy to come here tonight, because you guys, your colors are really light. So there's a lot to be said that's good about Oregon City. Mainly your demographics show that most people in this city will respond as they're supposed to. They'll complete the information. They'll do what is necessary to make sure that we get a complete and accurate count. This is a little bit more about the hard to count population. Most of the people in your planning department will use this kind of information. It also talks about, let's go back to it. You can see here renters in this one area of Oregon City. And this is just one track that we're talking about. These are all census tracts. And I think Oregon City is actually made up of 3 census tracts. I'm not 100% sure, but I know that it's more than one, because this only deals with approximately about 3,800 people, and you're closer to 12,000. So once again, let's go through the hard to count. We need to be concerned about your seniors. Children under 5 should be fairly manageable. The homeless and the migrant workers, we're going to be working with Clackamas County on. You have some foreign-born people that we need to talk to, and to make sure they understand that this is something that we do, and then also how to get around the internet access. Both of us are Oregon Partnership Specialists. We're here to educate, encourage, and engage. We're your lifeline to the U.S. Census. So whenever you have any questions, if you have a constituent who asks you a question and you don't know the answer, you'll be able to get a hold of us through the city recorder or the city manager and be able to get information that you need. So feel free to call me or to email me as you run across questions. Things will only get more heated as we get closer to the time. You'll start to get more and more questions. And rather than just saying you don't know, feel free to contact us and we will give you the answers that you need, okay? Complete count committees. Clackamas County has formed a complete count committee. The whole point of a complete count committee is to try to figure out what the demographics are of a particular area and whether or not we can get resources together to make it work. There's a lot of small cities, for example, the city of Forest Grove, the city of Cornelius, Independence, Monmouth. Those all have formed complete count committees because of their own reasons. But I will give you one example that I think you can understand very readily. Umatilla County. The first time I met with them, all 12 cities were in attendance. And the George, who is the commissioner, the board chair, he looked at everyone and he said, our school lunch program is 100% paid for by the federal government. We have lost people in our county. We know that. We need a complete count because we don't want our children to suffer. We don't want them to not get a lunch because we didn't count everyone. And they formed a CCC. Next one has to do with recruiting. We have 3 offices that will be opening in Portland. The first one, Salem, has already opened. We'll be opening one in Portland in September, and then one in Springfield. From each office, we'll have approximately 30 people who work in the office, and we'll have well over 1,000 enumerators from, well over 300 enumerators from each office. So we'll have over 1,000 people going around asking questions, knocking on doors, trying to get a complete count. Altogether, we'll have about 1,200 census employees in the area within just the next few months. It's important that we get as many recruiters as we can. We're behind on our recruiting numbers right now because of the economy. As you can see, the enumerators get $18 an hour. That's a pretty fair wage. It can be a part-time job to a full-time job. You just have to be over 18 years old and a U.S. citizen in order to apply to become an enumerator. And just to give you an example, you can work 20 hours one week, and then we'll email you and ask you what you want to work the following week. And if you want to work 30 hours, you can. It's better to have local enumerators than to have people come in for example, from the Portland office. They don't know where everyone lives. If it's an address that's hard to identify, if someone comes in from another area, they're not going to be able to identify it. So it's important that we have people in this area, in Clackamas County in particular, but also Oregon City, help us with the enumeration. We also pay for the mileage if they have to drive anywhere.
So are you hiring right now?
Yes, we are. The first program that we're doing is called the AdCam program, and it is just simply going around and checking and verifying addresses. First, we try to, when we get the addresses from the post office, we try to, using Google and other GIS resources, we try to verify all the addresses that way, but sometimes that's just not possible. And that's where we'll go out. Approximately 30% of our addresses nationwide will have to be independently verified. So that's the first program that we'll do. After that, we've got group enumeration that will happen, and then we'll do the non-response follow-up. So someone could theoretically work for us for quite some time. We do expect to have the whole process wrapped up right around July of 2020, because we do have to have, by law, all the information gathered and completed and everything else no later than December 31st to the president. What's really important to remember, though, is that there are no do-overs. If we miss the count the first time, we don't get to go back and do it again. Right now, we're living off of 2010 census data. According to the population research people, we got an accurate count, according to them. But we want to make sure that we get an accurate count this time, which is going to be significantly more difficult because of the political environment that we're currently in. Any questions? You guys are too easy.
Does that
Are
conclude
you
your
at the end?
presentation?
Yes, it does.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Well, I want to restate something because I think it's important in what you said. With federal funding being based on the populations we serve and emphasis on housing and urban development and school lunch programs and such, if you're not aware, this city has a substantial homeless population, and there's individuals in this room that service that and are affiliated with organizations that service that. Please engage them. I know it's going to be challenging, but any dollars we can get to help that population by virtue of their residency here, please capture those.
Okay.
Any questions or statements from the commission?
Not a statement, but just a question. So how is, I know at the last one, and I remember filling it out because it was a paper form, and actually I thought that was kind of interesting. Ethnicity, how is that being defined? I know there were a lot more categories from the time before.
There are more categories, and you can actually write in what you get to have. You know, it's become a long ways from what was it, the year 2000, when you could only be of one race.
Right.
Yeah. Now you can be of as many races as you want. You know, whatever. You don't have to choose between your parentage in order to determine what your race is. You get to actually write it in where you came from or what you believe your ethnicity is. We also, this is this is the first year that same-sex marriage will be recognized, which is also important for many, many people, that they can actually say who they're married to as far as which sex they are.
So when you send out the postcard, how is that being done? Does it go to the head of household, or it goes to everybody in the household? I mean,
It goes to the resident. It goes to the physical address.
it just says resident?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And by the way, this shouldn't affect you guys, but we do not send out to PO boxes, which is going to have a huge impact in Oregon. But in your area, I believe that most people here are served with a local mail delivery. Is that correct?
No, there's quite a few people who have PO
Okay,
boxes.
we're going to have to address them because they will not receive the invitation to self-report. So that's something that we will have to work on. What we do, what I've recommended that we do in some areas, using Umatilla County again as an example, because we believe that close to 60% of them do not receive a regular mail delivery, was we're going to have a sign at the post office that says important census information with a little arrow that goes down, and we'll have a flyer for them that will explain how they can call or they can go over the internet to self-report. But it's a big issue for all of us, the fact that we do not mail to post office boxes, because we feel that it's similar to an email address. You can take it with you when you move.
Commissioner Lyle Smith.
Have you already started working with our library director on working with our library to offer, easy access via our computers if folks want to go in that way?
I met with the State of Oregon's Library Association, and we spoke to them when we had a joint meeting with Oregon and Washington. I think it was just last month. And we will, the State of Oregon has been putting out information. I met with Arlene from the State Library Association today. So we are working very closely with the libraries, and Clackamas County is also working closely with them. We're going to be doing some webinar training as well. One promise, though, that I have made to the State of Oregon's library system is that we will not ask the library people themselves to have to be involved with the census, that it should be friends of the library, or if the people who work in the library want to volunteer, that's fine. But we feel that they're already taxed enough with their normal jobs, and to try and give them an additional responsibility is unfair to them. So we will be looking at friends of the library or other people who can assist us with doing things in the library.
Very good. Any further questions or comments?
No, thank you very
Okay,
much.
Thank you, Ms. Michelle.
Thank you.
And please stay in contact, okay?
Our next item is item 3B, 19-338. I'm told it's going to be a very dynamic presentation on enterprise resource planning system implementation.
Thank you,
I'm
Commissioner.
looking at Lewis, and he thinks his title of the slide presenter king is at stake, so let's see what you got.
Thank you, Commission President O'Donnell. Thank you, City Commissioners. We're excited to present an update on the Enterprise Resource Planning System implementation. I want to thank you, Commissioners, for sponsoring the project as part of your City Commission goals for the 2017 through 2019 biennium. Also want to thank Mr. John Lewis in the Public Works Department, and also Laura Turway and Mike Roberts from the Community Development Department for their outstanding efforts on the land management module that we're going to talk about in a moment. And of course, thank you to the Finance Department staff and individual leaders throughout the organization across departments that worked hard to make this project a success. And most, I want to thank the person sitting next to me, Ryan Bradyhoff. You met him at a couple meetings before as the management analyst at the city. I talked with a cohort of mine from a nearby city, a very close city that implemented the same system 2 years ago, and they spent about $100,000 to bring in an external project manager to do their work. In our case, Ryan was the project manager for us, and we did the entire project in-house. He did an amazing job of coordinating all the staff across the city to make sure that we got all the project milestones completed on time. And he's here with an update presentation for you to tell you how things went. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Commissioner.
Good evening, City Commissioners. My name is Ryan Bradyhoff. I'm the Senior Management Analyst with the city. And yes, I'm here to present on the Enterprise Resource Planning System implementation. Nearly 2 years ago, I came before the City Commission with a recommendation to authorize a contract with Tyler Technologies for an ERP, or Enterprise Resource Planning System, to include software and implementation services. Now I'd like to provide the City Commission with an update on the status of the project. Before updating you on the status, I'd like to explain why it was necessary to replace our old system, Eden. First, it's worth noting that the old system was just that. It was old. Eden had been with the city since the 1980s. It was originally installed on a DOS platform, then subsequently upgraded to a Windows platform in 2002. It was that installation of the system that the city would then use for the next 15 years. More than just old, though, Eden had become outdated. The developers of Eden had shifted their focus from that system to other product offerings. While they agreed to continue to support that system, they basically ceased to do improvements or upgrades. This became a critical issue for the city, being that software has to be continually developed and improved in order to meet the needs of its users. So realizing the need to migrate to a new system, the city began taking steps in that direction. Next, I'd like to provide a brief recap of the steps that were taken that ultimately led to the City Commission approving a contract with Tyler Technologies. First, in July of 2016, the Finance Department issued an RFP, or request for proposals, to determine the available options and financial feasibility of replacing the outdated software. After reviewing, grading, and ranking those RFPs, the city's preference was Tyler Technologies, and specifically their Encode InterGov solution. Next, in January of 2017, the City Commission established this project as a formal goal. About 6 months later, the budget was adopted, which included funding for the system purchase and implementation. In July of 2017, the City Commission awarded the contract to Tyler Technologies, and about 2 months later, after some negotiation with the vendor, the contract was signed, and soon after that, the implementation began. The project officially began in December of 2017 with a kickoff celebration here at City Hall. All city staff were invited. The kickoff accomplished 3 things. First, it gave me the opportunity to introduce myself as project manager and to provide a high-level overview of the project. Second, it allowed me to introduce the project team, which was made up of 13 staff members from across the city departments. And actually included in your packet is a graphic showing the makeup of the project team, the roles they served, and the subsystems they supported. And thirdly, the kickoff served as a retirement party for our old system, which, as I mentioned, had been with the city since the 1980s. Overall, it was a fun and informative event and a good way to mark the beginning of what would be a long and challenging process of migrating to a new software system. Shortly after the kickoff in January of 2018, formal implementation-related tasks began. This calendar is one of the many milestone tracking tools we created and used throughout the implementation. This calendar shows the months of January through October of 2018, and it kind of provides an overview. It may be a little hard to read. There is a higher resolution version in your packet, but the purpose here is really to just give you an overview of how staff was involved in the implementation throughout the entire 2018 calendar year. The colored cells represent days staff were engaged in implementation-related activities, and the darker cells represent days that the vendor was actually here on site working directly with city staff to configure and train on the system. As you can see, the project was divided into 3 phases. The first phase was the InterGov permitting and land management system. That includes planning, permitting and inspections, business licenses, code enforcement, and GIS, Geographic Information Systems. That system went live on June 18th of 2018. The second phase was the Encode financial system, and that included the general ledger, accounts payable, and payroll. That system went live on August 13th of 2018. And the third and final phase was the Encode customer service utility billing, which also included cashiering, and that system went live on September 24th, 2018. So now I'm happy to report that all 3 of these phases were completed in 2018 on time and within budget, thus successfully completing the software implementation project. Now, if we have a moment, I'd like to share with you a few of the benefits of the new system. Actually, going back here, for instance, the utility billing module, that system has reduced processing time for monthly billing. In Eden, this took 2 to 3 days, and now this is down to 1 day. This is due to more powerful processing capabilities as well as new exception reporting, which has resulted in the elimination of time-consuming manual aspects of the process. In the case of the financial system, the system has enhanced inquiry and transaction drill-down capabilities due in part to the integration between the modules. So for instance, the utility billing, cash receiving, and general ledger functions are now all integrated in one system, whereas previously that was not the case. Actually, in our old system, in the past, these systems were not integrated. And so for instance, if a customer would call and ask about a payment, we'd potentially have to go to 3 different systems to find that information. That could lead to errors, and was just inefficient in general. And then finally, an example of a benefit of the InterGov land management system. This system allows coordination between plan review, permitting and inspections, code enforcement, business licenses, and GIS. And the reason for this is because this system, InterGov, unlike our previous system, is a true land management system. Our previous system, Eden, was actually just a permitting system, and so everything was treated like a permit and had to work within that framework. But this is, like I say, is a true land management system. Real quick, these are just a few screenshots from the system. This is what a user would see, such as like myself, a finance user. The modules there on the left, and then this is my dashboard. I can access, journal entries that may need to be approved, drill down on expenditure reports. For instance, if I were to click on requisitions, I could see requisitions that needed to be approved, and that would take me to this screen where then I could further filter on those requisitions. Here's actually a screenshot of the tablets that our utility staff use in the field. The use of these tablets has replaced the need to take printed paper copies out into the field, so helping us to go paperless. And then here's another screenshot. This is a list of inspections, and actually this is an inspector's dashboard. As mentioned previously, we completed the formal implementation project in 2018. That project consisted of migrating or transitioning from our previous system, Eden, to our new system, Encode Intergov. As part of that effort, we implemented the modules shown here. As a result, Eden is no longer used in any capacity by the city. With the migration completed in 2018, the first few months of 2019 was spent implementing system functionality that is brand new to the city. In other words, functionality that was not present in our previous system, Eden, but is present in our new system, Encode Intergov. This includes, for instance, bank reconciliation, which allows us to perform the bank rec in the system, whereas previously this was done outside of the system in spreadsheets, so it was a more manual process. This feature was implemented with the April bank reconciliation. Another new feature implemented in early 2019 was position budgeting. This feature was implemented in March of this year and was actually used to calculate the personnel costs included in the 2019-2021 budget. And another new feature we are in the process of implementing is electronic purchasing, which includes requisitions, receipting, and purchase orders. The most significant, however, of the new features, by far, I think, is electronic employee time entry. This system, which also includes a scheduling component, allows employees to enter their time electronically online, whereas previously time was entered on hard copy paper time cards. This means that the city's entire payroll process, from requests for time off, to time entry, to direct deposit of pay, to email of the check stub, is now for the first time entirely paperless. Also, it's worth noting that of all the implementation-related tasks various staff have been involved in during the past year and a half, this was the one aspect of the implementation that each and every staff member participated in, because, of course, each staff member has to submit their time. Staff received training on time entry in February, then performed tests of the system in both March and April. The entire city went live on this feature on April 21st, 2019, the start of the May pay period. Okay, closing thoughts. This project, which has spanned the past year and a half and is now coming to a close, there's a lot of factors that go into a successful implementation, but I can definitely say that for us, the reason why this was a success was because of our staff members, from our steering committee, which oversaw the project, to the functional leads, which were kind of the subject matter experts of their areas, to our IT department, which supported us throughout the project, and really down to each individual end user. Basically, they put in the hard work that was necessary to make it a success. And so I definitely owe them a huge thank you. That concludes the presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
I don't mind going first. I guess the first thing I'd say is if you weren't already working for us, I'd say somebody hire this guy. It's a good piece of work.
Thank you.
It's an expert. The project management was excellent. And I give credit to Mr. Parno for overseeing. I give credit for you for being the project manager. And all the words you said, and I hope people are listening because you get so much criticism of government. But I heard words like on time, within budget, ongoing cost savings, error avoidance, coordination of assets, operations management. And in the end, you didn't take personal credit, you gave credit to the team. So I'd say congratulations to all on a job well done.
Thank you very much.
Questions or comments from the commission? No? So good, no questions. Thank you.
It's not a question, but, again, to reiterate what Commissioner O'Donnell said, that yes, that's great. So what's been the ongoing training with staff on making sure everybody gets used to the system, and where do you go from here?
Yeah, where we go from here, there actually are, I think, a few more features we could look at implementing over the course of the next 6 months or so. Again, just those new features that the previous system didn't have, and we could take advantage. So that's one thing we could do in the coming months. Otherwise, training, yeah, I think that's as their staff turnover and things like that, I think it's going to be something we're going to be constantly looking at is always training. So yeah, that's something I plan to do long term here at the city.
And then you talked about people from GIS. So how does this integrate with the GIS system?
The InterGov Land Management System actually interfaces with our GIS system. And so any permit that you look at, you can actually drill down into the GIS. You can go to the map and find permits on the map.
So perfect. John, I don't know if you recall, but it was suggested at, not at a commission meeting, but at a community meeting that we look at our system GIS and whatever we were going to go to about 2 years ago to figure out how we can actually monument some of our signs and benches and things like that. Is there a way that this new system can integrate with that can be done? We've actually, the neighborhood has actually started doing the documentation of, where this thing is and that bench and.
So I would say those kinds of things are definitely GIS mostly. I'm not sure that unless we're issuing a permit with that feature, it would touch the InterGov system. But documentation of where things like benches, trash cans, artwork.
Yes.
We've done a lot of that already. Our sign inventory is pretty complete. Once you do those data sets, then there's the reconfirming that you have everything. So there's always that update process, but we have a pretty extensive list, but I would say there's more to be done.
Okay, yeah, because we specifically, the sign at the head of Singer Hill needs to get documented that, it is owned by the city now, that it was, and where it came from. That's what we're talking about, those sort of things. Getting all that information in there so that we know.
I'll make a note. It may be done, but I'll make a note to
Okay.
check.
Well, I know Martin had talked about it, and he said that there was a way that it was barcoded in the city that he came from, and you could go up to it and go, okay, the sign for Keith and Lila on the Bluehoffen Promenade, that was put in X year. It was donated by X, and it's been there, and, it's on a maintenance schedule or something like that. So it was that sort of thing that Martin had suggested that we thought was, the community thought was a fantastic idea.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Parno.
Thank you, Commission President O'Donnell and Commissioners. So I just wanted to add a couple of more quick things. The checklist for how you determine whether a project is a success or not. For me, I have a lot of criteria. It's pretty long, but it would take a long time to go through that. But some of the things that I just wanted to mention were there was a pretty significant amount of outreach to your constituents, to the public. And if you recall, those of you that were at the State of the City presentation from the mayor, a business owner actually stood up and said, well, I'm not sure I like paying utility bills, but this is a really great system and I appreciate how functional it is, which Ryan and I were like, yeah, that's pretty awesome. And then also credit to folks like in the building department, Mike Roberts, who brought in folks from the development community to sit down with the system and tested it before they went live, certain aspects of it. So there's just a lot of little parts to that. Last thing I want to mention is even just to the degree of how impressed I am with the work that they did. Another thing that comes to mind is when the customer service supervisor, Marcy Barrett, said the system automatically had a process by which they charge a certain fee. I think it was $1.15 per transaction if you use the online platform for customer service. Marcy wasn't having it. She said we could do it cheaper, and they went and they found a whole different system that would allow an integrated with, and it's 15 cents? 15. So 15 cents instead of $1.15 charged to the customers and so forth. And so that's kind of always going the step further, because a lot of times people can come in and say, well, it's a pretty big thing implementing this. Let's just do it. They went the step further on a lot of cases, and I'm just really impressed with them. And so thank you, Ryan, and thank you, commissioners, for your support.
Thank you. Very well done.
Thanks. You might as well pass the candy back. It's not me.
We're now going to enter citizen comments, and I remind everybody that citizens are allowed up to 3 minutes to present information relevant to the city, but not listed as an item on tonight's agenda. We have 3 speakers listed. Our first 2 are Mr. Paul Edgar, followed by Damon Mabey. Gentlemen?
Sure, absolutely.
Mr. Edgar.
Thank you. Paul Edgar, Oregon City, Kanema. Wanted to put on record emails that I'd sent out to you and to city staff about problems on offenses like at 302 3rd Avenue, where the fence is right out approximately 12 feet into the city right of way. And it's a stockade type fence, which in effect is illegal or violates city code. And this problem's been going on for a couple years. And what's serious about this and why I wanted it on the record is that we went to code enforcement. We talked to the staff. We tried to see if we could work through this. But when code enforcement gets a complaint or a request, they send it down to staff. And if staff says, well, we don't want to do anything with it, it goes into the circular file. And there's no record keeping, no follow-up. And so we have a situation that's been going on, and it's where we start to lose faith in government and how we process things and how we enforce the codes that we have on the books. So we had a safety conditions there where sight visibility was restricted. We have a fence that's 8 feet high or 6 feet high when it should only be 42 inches high. It's 12 feet into the right-of-way without a right-of-way permit. So, and it's a stockade fence, and our HRB 1740 code says you can't have them. So we have point after point after point, and I've talked with people. I sent this email directly to Tony, and I've sent it to the planning, and I've sent it to John, and I've sent it to everybody to try to talk about it. And it's almost like there's a conspiracy to say, well, let's not do something, or we got somebody that's guilted, where we're going to protect it. I don't know what the circumstances is, but this situation should be investigated. And that's the key to this. Why did something like this happen for so long? And where did it fall through? Because if it fell through on this, and where else is it falling through? And so that's the reason why I felt that it was important. Not only did I send these emails out to you, but I wanted it to be part of the record. Thank you.
I know we typically don't engage in conversation, but I'm going to say this. I've read every one of your emails.
This is like the 3rd time we've seen it.
Yeah, well, we've seen it. And I've actually driven it to try to understand what I'm looking at down there. And it's referred to staff. If there's a question of lack of activity, you deserve an answer, even if it's not an answer that's favorable to you. And we'll have that discussion outside of this meeting, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mabey.
Hi, Damon Mabey, Oregon City resident. Couple things. First, on Wyatt's thing, I think it's interesting that we cast out Eden instead of we were cast out of Eden. Anyway.
That may be the most profound comment we'll see tonight.
And then second, and real quick, regarding the census, another item that didn't get discussed but is of interest, I think, to most people kind of statewide is we're on the cusp of possibly adding a 6th representative. So getting the count right could mean that we get more of a voice in Washington. So that's why it's an important thing. What I did actually fill out the card to talk about was just, I'm a history person. So I wanted to just mention that 75 years ago at this time, thousands of people were dying on the beaches of Normandy to ensure that our way of life would continue, and that D-Day is happening now because it's already the 6th over there. And so no matter what you think about local government, state government, or federal government, it's our government. It's not something imposed on us by an outside force. And what we do for ourselves and to ourselves. So I just wanted to acknowledge the sacrifices that were made. So.
Thank you for every one of those comments. I know my family served. Thank you.
For every veteran. Who
Yes,
gave
from everybody.
All.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Mr. O'Donnell,
Yes, Commissioner.
is there again, just getting back to the citizen comment, I believe that at the last time Mr. Edgar appeared, we, as a city commission, asked for something to be done about this, and I did go down there myself several times, and I agree that it is a problem. It definitely does not meet the fence requirements for the Kenema National Register District, and I think that we need to have immediate action. I really don't want to have Mr. Edgar come back here again and talk to us about this. I thought it had been taken care of.
I don't think Mr. Edgar should have to come back here again either. I mean, the points you raised and the points Mr. Edgar raised are cogent points that deserve a response, the type of fence, quality fence, the placement of the fence, and it needs an answer, and we owe that to him. So we can have that discussion outside of this meeting and ask how we're going to pursue that. I don't think we need to discuss it in an open meeting tonight. And then we get back to you with an answer, because no answer is not an acceptable outcome.
I would like to see it be resolved.
As we would, and we will have that discussion.
Thank you.
And I believe the commission is giving that direction to staff.
Again.
As a commission, so. Mr. Guile, if you would please.
Now for the real critical information. Tom Guile, Oregon City. But before I start with the critical, we were over there looking at the stats, and I was talking to Sarah out front. Our 0.4 billion that we get out of the 882, it's only 1.5% of the budget. So we need to push up our numbers so we get a bigger piece of that pie. And I guess I was looking at each state gets about 17.64 billion. But we're only getting, we're getting around 11, but that's only 1.5% of it, just a figure. Critical information. I just wanted to let you all know that this weekend, Rocky's going to be working the streets of Portland.
As what?
This is 100 years before D-Day. It was the 175th anniversary of Oregon City.
Yeah.
And,
Not yet. Not yet.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, okay, close enough. They were here. But Rocky every year walks in the parade of Rose Festival, and I'm one of the MCs. I've been doing it for 15 years, MCing the parade. And I have a tower down there, and we usually have a few Oregon City residents who sit there by the tower, because I do a lot of trivia, and a lot of it's about Oregon City. It's interesting how many people in Oregon don't know how Oregon City was named. I mean, Portland was named because of Oregon City and all the other facts of the first electrical, the first newspaper in Oregon City. So I'm entertaining as well as educating the public, but I wanted to invite anybody down to the corner of right Pioneer Square on Broadway, and I think it's Yam Hill, and right outside Nordstrom's. They put up towers, and we have announcers all throughout the city, and I've got the one on Broadway, as I said. So Rocky's going to be walking, is Doug going to be walking as
So it's the Oregon City Heritage Coordinating Committee. That's so a lot of the representatives from a lot of Oregon City's museums. Oregon City has its own float to city heritage groups, and I know that the band and the dance team and ROTC and we're not all together for some reason this year, but we're split up. I guess we caused too much problems or something. We were all together, but I think it's two separate entries now.
Right.
But
mainly, I just wanted to tell the public that's listening, as well as anybody here, that we do have a great representation in the Rose Festival Parade. And if you'd like to come down and sit by my tower and get entertained, there's very few people that give a walk around mic to a remote, because they have strict instructions. You're supposed to follow the script, because they don't want somebody saying something political or something off color or something. But they've trusted me after 15 years to finally get out there and walk the parade. Yeah, really. But seriously, come on on down. It's the parade starts at the Coliseum at 10 o'clock on Saturday, but it doesn't get downtown till 11:30. I take the light rail, and I encourage anyone to, from right here in Clackamas and down in Milwaukee. It takes you right down to the spot where you need to be. You get right back on and come back home. But I encourage anyone to come down and cheer on Rocky and all the other representation from Oregon City.
Thank you, Mr.
That
Gahn.
wasn't that critical.
That's very good. Good information. We have a late entry in the form of Mr. Bob Mahoney.
Bob Mahoney, Oregon City. I hadn't intended to speak tonight until I heard Tom talk and Damon talk and Paul Edgar talk. On a light note, there's not a night that goes by when the Planning Commission meets that I'm not entertained by Tom. So anyway, either what he says or what he doesn't say. No offense, Tom. How to put this? How to put this? I guess in respect. Tomorrow, June 6th. What do you say?
What can
you can't. There's nothing you can say. I just lost an uncle, 93 years old, who fought in the South Pacific as a medic. He didn't carry a weapon. He saved a lot of lives. Lived a hard life. Lived a good life. But let's respect those people that gave us our government, saved our country, saved civilization. And let's run this city in respect out of them, to enforce our laws and our codes, to respond to our people that are making complaints. Let's just go out there and, out of respect for everybody, ourselves, so that we have self-respect for ourselves and this government, that we're going to enforce our laws and our ordinances. Given the fact that we're operating under limited resources, we always do. Government always does. There's always problems to solve, which requires skill and resources, financial resources. Roads, parks, code enforcement, law enforcement. So out of respect for those people, I hope that we make a commitment to, in the future, look after our kids and look after this city and enforce our laws out of respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mahoney.
Thank you.
Our next item is adoption of the agenda. Anybody have any comments or questions?
I would move we adopt the agenda as presented.
So moved. You don't have to do it.
Well, I'm just saying.
Good. As long as no one has anything to.
No, I thought it was terrific.
Move on to public hearings, first of which is the ongoing development code amendments. Who's going to lead us through that tonight?
Thank you, Commissioners.
Pete Walter.
My name is Pete Walter, planner with the Community Development Department. I have a short presentation to give you. Tonight, we're going to be asking for a continuation of file LEG 1801 to the June 19th. But before that happens, we're going to just go over the final code amendments packet. We prepared the entire packet and printed that out. So that's the June 5th, 2019 code amendment packet. Thanks. And here we go. The topics we're discussing tonight are the proposed shelter code language that is in the packet, some shelter definitions, briefly talk about our recommended findings, and then discuss with you any outstanding concerns you may have. With respect to shelters, at the last meeting, we made the following changes in response to your comments. Shelters would be a conditional use in all zones where they are permitted, and those zones are proposed as the medium-density residential zones, which includes the R5 and R3.5 zone for up to 10 beds, high-density residential zone district, or the R2 district, for 11 or more beds, or anything beyond 10, 0 to 10. The mixed-use downtown district, except they will be prohibited in the downtown design district along Main Street and the mixed-use corridor. Shelters would be prohibited in all other zoning designations, including low-density residential zones. And we have included some additional definitions for your consideration for day shelters, emergency shelters, and warming and cooling shelters. Now, shelters would also be subject to these additional standards in the conditional use chapter. Those standards include the requirement for a shelter to provide a written community engagement plan, which includes the following information listed here, and also a requirement for an initial community meeting followed by an annual community meeting with mailed notice of that meeting within 300 feet to all property owners, the neighborhood association that they're located within, and the city. So let's talk about the definitions. The main definition that we've got in your packet is for shelter, as listed here. That is a congregate facility designed to provide housing to shelter families and individuals offered on a short-term basis, may offer meals, lodging, and associated services on site aimed at helping people move towards self-sufficiency. Shelters may include day shelters, temporary cooling or warming shelters, and other temporary or permanent spaces made available for sheltering individuals or families. Shelters are not considered bed and breakfast inns, boarding houses, hotels, or motels. New definition added was for a day shelter, which is utilized between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. and which does not contain sleeping facilities. An emergency shelter, which is any facility, primary purpose, which is to provide temporary overnight shelter for the homeless in general or for specific populations of the homeless under specified circumstances, and which does not require occupants to sign leases or occupancy agreements. Emergency shelters include temporary cooling or warming shelters and other temporary spaces made available for sheltering individuals or families in response to emergencies when an emergency has been declared by the City Commission by resolution. So this definition encompasses the emergency shelter that we are familiar with, that we have been approving through resolution stating an emergency. Temporary warming and cooling shelters means a shelter operated between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. when the outside temperature is as low as 33 degrees or as high as 95 degrees, including wind chill factors as measured by NOAA. And that is what we can go back to and talk about with shelters. Now on to recommended findings. So a staff report includes all of our revisions to date to the extent that they're applicable for legislative action. So it's a 50-page set of findings, and it details compliance with the zoning changes and amendments chapter. It's at 1768, which includes these criteria. You have to be in compliance with a comprehensive plan, goals, and policies. There's a detailed section on that. We've got to be able to serve these facilities with public facilities at the time of occupancy. Those land uses have to be consistent with our transportation system, and we have to address any statewide planning goals that are not addressed by our comprehensive plan. We will have a tentative revised adoption scheduled depending on what happens tonight. On June 19th, we would be requesting to close any public record and testimony and asking for your approval and a first reading of the ordinance. And on either July 3rd or 17th, whichever meeting occurs, a second reading of that ordinance. And as far as the items which have been remanded back to the Planning Commission for additional discussion, the short-term rental policy, and the discussion of mixed-use downtown height limits. We'd be separating those things out from the bulk of the amendments, plus any of the other items that you deem necessary to separate out and discuss further, with the intent to move forward the bulk of those amendments on these dates. Thank you, and that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, excuse me, I'm losing my voice and trying to get through this meeting. Two things I would say. Of all the code amendments, this is going to be the most difficult. This could be a work session
Right.
indefinitely. And part of that refers to definitions like short-term and temporary and what's a service. And we have the addition of cooling shelters now and hours of operation. I almost feel like every time we do this, we get bogged down in it. And I don't know, I know it's on the agenda, I just don't know how to, I guess we'll just start wading through it unless one of my fellow commissioners has another message. So,
No, we start waiting.
okay.
When are we taking public comment?
Do it now.
Before,
Unless you have questions for the staff, I would roll into public comment and then go from there.
I do have one question for Pete. So part of the reason we were dividing up shelter types, or at least this is what I thought, was tied to our desire to waive conditional use permit fees for specific types of shelters versus other types of shelters.
Right.
And I've looked through all of these 348 pages of the red line, and so I'm trying to figure out when does that happen? It seems to be separate from this, but I think it's a pretty important issue. And because I don't feel like it's been addressed, it's hard for me to move forward with this until I know we're addressing it. So can you address that issue?
Okay. I haven't talked to Laura Turway a great deal about that. I'm glad you brought that up. I think the intent was that a fee waiver for a review fee could potentially be handled separately from the code process itself, because we normally adopt fees through a separate resolution every year. But you're right. In order to be able to apply a different fee to a particular type of use, we probably have to discuss that particular type of use first. So I think that probably leads into the discussion of the distinctions between the various types of shelters.
So if we were to pass this ordinance, these changes, and they go into effect July 1, say, we have existing shelters, we have existing day shelters that would then fall under a conditional use. Are they grandfathered in? They would not have to pay a conditional use fee, or?
As I understand it, the day shelter, My Father's Heart, is a pre-existing use, so they would not have to go through that process.
That was not my understanding.
That's not my understanding.
Okay.
I think that discussion on fees and fee waivers was still an active discussion.
Okay.
And I mean, that subject in itself is one where you start talking about what cost does the city incur as a result of their presence? Is there any opportunity to offset it? How do we guarantee reasonable and continued management of those places, not only pre-existing places, but potentially places in the future? We have a duty to this community to try to get this right. And that discussion is not a closed discussion. And I know this is an aggressive attempt to resolve this by these dates. Quite honestly, I'd be surprised, but continuing on.
Yeah, I guess my concern is I don't want to pass something or move something forward with our intent of saying, you know, I have yes to a fee on this one, no to a fee, no fee, you know, and so, but then have it go into effect and us not be prepared to adjust the fee schedule.
I guess I think just want to make sure that we understand that, yeah, because there's two issues. One is a conditional use permit and whether the fee is required to submit that application. I think the second issue that I just heard was pre-existing non-conforming. So if you have a use that's permitted that's in place and you change the code, we usually consider that pre-existing non-conforming. We have a section of our code that addresses that. And when certain thresholds are hit on a pre-existing non-conforming use, different requirements kick in. And I heard multiple, that's not what I understood related. And I wasn't sure if it was addressing the fee part of the discussion or that, for example, Father's Heart is not, if there's an assumption that Father's Heart is not a pre-existing non-conforming use. So I'm just trying to,
It didn't have to do with the fee. The fee, in my opinion, is a separate issue that is to be resolved outside of this because the fee is not, in my opinion, a land use action. It's a land use fee. So we're going to deal with that. I think we need to separate it. I don't want it to get this bogged down, but what I was actually going to suggest was, before we get into whether it's pre-existing non-conforming, so it's sorry, Rachel, we planners don't use the term grandfather because that doesn't mean anything. It's either pre-existing or it's not. So that's just me and my planning background. I would like to see us detach this particular topic from the rest of the codes because I think generally, with the exception maybe one or two minor things, everything else we've discussed ad infinitum. And I would like to see this maybe for personal reasons or professional reasons. I'd like to see the rest of it move on and deal with that on a separate basis because I think I agree with Frank to an extent that we've really not discussed it thoroughly. And I don't know if the public will think we have or haven't, but there's still some minor questions in my mind about, the definitions. And I've read all the stuff that the staff got from other jurisdictions, and it's still not quite settling right yet. I don't know if I think they might need to be tweaked a little bit to really capture what is going to work for Oregon City is what I'm really kind of leading towards.
Oh, they do. I have a whole list of edits. So I don't know if we want to go through them right now or if we just want to pull this item.
I want to pull that part of it out and talk about your edits, some of the stuff you've talked about. There's some things I'd like to, I think we all have things where we want to weigh in on it, and I think it's too important of an issue to keep it in the big picture here. And I think the other parts of it have primarily been resolved, and I would really like to just move that stuff on.
Comments from other commissioners?
So you're saying set the whole shelter topic aside?
Right.
So we can save it for last.
Yeah. So we can.
I understand why, because I struggle with the same. I struggle with things like what's a service, what is a sleeping facility. Well, I've been to Father's Heart, and people do sleep there. I mean, there's provision for it. I mean, lay down, take. I don't know what constitutes sleep. What constitutes a sleeping facility? What constitutes a service? I mean, I have struggled with these things. I mean, if providing a place to sleep is not a service, then why aren't hotels free? So,
yeah, that's a good point.
I'm with you to. I know that the parties involved want to bring this to a conclusion, but this is the single most difficult thing. And I think we can get bogged down in it at the expense of everything else. So I would be in favor of setting it over and saving it for last, because I think it is going to be the longest of discussions.
Yeah, I think there are other parts of the update that we can move ahead and move forward.
I need to hear from the commission.
Since there's a couple of other things we have to deal with that the Planning Commission is going to come back to us, we could package those things together and then move all of that as one. If we think that we can resolve this particular issue, we can resolve. I think we can. I feel very confident that we can. I just think there needs to be more. We need to kind of have a work session about it.
So taking all those comments in the form of a motion would be to set this over and deal with it last.
I think you're proposing to pull it out like short-term rentals and mixed-use downtown.
Yes, and move everything else
We're at the
forward.
last.
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, that's
now,
exactly
whether
what you're
folks
hearing.
agree or not.
Yes, that's exactly what
As
you're
opposed to pull it out still, like, I think you're proposing to move forward with the sections of the ordinance code amendments that there's agreement on.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
And put this back to a work session or the planning commission and it would be adopted separately
Yes,
at a later date.
yes,
I would like for it to come back here.
yeah. Yeah, to us, rather, yeah, I think Rachel's saying not go back to the planning commission. I mean, if they want to weigh in and give us their opinion, I think that's great.
Yeah.
But I think there's enough concern that, again, as I said, I don't want to bog down the rest of the code amendments that everybody has worked hard on, including myself.
Yeah, I'm fine with
Frankly, I
that.
don't want to see this again.
It sounds like
for
we
a
have,
while.
it sounds like we have
We have a
consensus.
consensus, I agree.
And that we would start possibly with a work session, invite all those key parties back, have that dialogue, maybe clarify all these things and give us the ability to make an ultimate decision.
Yeah, to make an informed
Okay,
decision.
I'm fine with that. And
Do
apparently
you
the
want
rest
that
of
in
the
the form
commission
of,
is.
well, we need to
Well, you still
open
got public
we need to-
comment.
the public
Yeah.
testimony. I'm not making a motion right now or anything like that,
And then I
so.
have other things to go through
And then
too.
you have
This
other
was
stuff,
just,
so.
Yeah, tackling shelters.
So what's your preference? Have public comment?
Sure.
Yeah.
Do we have public comment on this that we haven't heard
I think
before
we do, yeah.
or want to hear again? Sir?
Do you want to, so we have Paul Edgar and James Nasita.
Mr. Nacita?
My name's Paul Edgar, Oregon City. I sit on the board of a Veteran Day Center. I've actively been out working in homeless issues feverishly for probably 2.5, 3 years. It's not a big problem. It's not an easy problem to solve. But I think it should be discussed in a work session. That's all in that part, just, and bring in people that are out there so that there's nothing always right. There's a lot of gray areas in the middle of what it is. And to me, I'm concerned with it. One of the big things that I came along, wanted to talk about tonight is Historic Review Board. We have things that are being discussed at the Historic Review Board, and I was at the last meeting, and it's part of code revisions and things like this. I think it should be continued over too, because the Historic Review Board's area is asking, there's not a full clarification like a district like Kenema is a National Register Historic District. It has historic places status, and that means the whole boundary. So the question really comes in, do we allow changes that affect the whole district? Because it's not just the buildings, an individual building. When you come in there and you alter the viability and the authenticity of the district.
I have a question for you, sir.
Yes.
All these comments on HRB, are they related to?
They are related into here because one of the issues here is they want to eliminate our ability to have to appeal. And we've had historically the ability to appeal. And when you make it too expensive, and it's almost like homeless issues, you make it too expensive, you make fees too expensive, all of a sudden we limit public from being the checks and balances. Okay, and this to me is, we are taking that section of it and it could change it from $50 to $8,000. And when it's $8,000, how is the public going to be able to respond?
I'll respond to you to tell you that we have touched upon every one of these issues. I invite you to bring them up in the same discussion we're going to have on these, and let's try to resolve them.
Yes.
I mean, I know what you're saying. And we've heard the same thing from Mr. Nacita, where fees get to the point where it prohibits public involvement. But we're dealing with this issue at this point. I want everything to be directly related to this issue.
Oh, this is part of.
And I get your correlation.
Yeah, this is right there. And this is one of those issues right there in the front end of this, of the changes to the code that is being enacted on. And I'm thinking, and I'm just saying that it will have dramatic effect on public involvement and checks and balances.
And I would say join us in the work session, please.
I would love to. Thank you.
Mr. Nacita.
Before he starts, I need to ask Pete a question. Is there a
I think we're gonna
specific
talk about
code
this.
section that Paul Edgar is referring to?
I want to make the clarification that
228.
228.
Kelly's here and she's our liaison to the HRB, so come on up.
228.
You want to comment on this?
228, or you're saying page 228?
No, chapter 2, 28.070. It's the
I'm
appeals
flipping
section.
back and forth between the red lines and the other one, so.
It's page 5 of the red line.
Page 5, red line.
The very bottom is where it starts. This the appeal, and it's actually all on the next page where it all gets crossed out.
But it's important to point out that we're not getting rid of the appeals,
I think I asked
right? The appeals
It got
section
moved.
is in 1750.
50.
And that's where all of the land use appeals are outlined.
Right.
And so it made sense for appeals of historic review board decisions to be covered in 1750, and they still are.
Yeah, that's
So
what
I
thought
don't
you-
think it's correct
yeah.
to say we're getting rid of
No,
appeals.
that's what I remember you said from the
Historic
last
review board
time.
decisions are still appealable to the city commission like they always have been.
Thank you, Ms. Richter.
Yeah. Carrie, I think you specifically mentioned that at one of the previous meetings, that we were consolidating some of the chapters, so there wasn't a separate little thing about historic review board, a separate thing over here, a separate thing over here. They'd all be in one place, so you're not flipping back and
Just
forth.
to explain where I think this chapter 2 came from, I think it came from, and Denise, Commissioner McGriff, you may know better
Denise
than
is
me,
fine.
but I think it came from the Certified Local Government Program authorization that in order to be qualified for grants, a local government has to be a certified local government, like blessed by the State Historic Preservation Office as qualifying. And so the State Historic Preservation Office adopted a model ordinance. And I suspect that this came from that. And that's why it's stood alone for a long time, because it came from that model ordinance. But it ought to fall, all of the procedures for land use ought to be in 1750, and that's why it's there.
I think you're probably correct. We were a CLG before certified local government with SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office, before I joined staff. And it always was a separate section because we had to adopt something by resolution to go to the state to get blessed to be a CLG. So I think if we go turn to 1750, all of that should be in its own, should all be together in its own place. As I recall, I remember we talked about this at Planning Commission because there was a concern, and we didn't have both versions.
258.
Yeah.
Page 258.
Yeah.
1750, 190 is appeals.
Right, and in 1750-030 is the summary of the city's decision-making process, and on the second page of that, it says historic review, and it says type 1 and type 3, and then type 3 decisions have appeals to the city commission.
Yes.
So it's just baked into the same procedures.
Yeah, let me, oh, you're still here. So yeah, what she just read, it says, for type 3 and type 4 decisions, only those persons or recognized neighborhood associations who have participated either orally or in writing have standing to appeal decision of the Planning Commission or the Historic Review Board as applicable. Grounds for the appeal are limited to those issues raised either orally or in writing before the close of the public hearing, which is the same thing we had in chapter 2. It's now in this chapter.
Now, is that saying that if I testified during the hearing,
either written or orally, you would have standing.
I would have standing, and therefore I would not have to get into this fee structure. The question really comes back is to making sure that the fees are nominal in such a way that it does not prohibit or restrict people's access to appealing.
We have a staff member that wants to address that question.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. My name is Kelly Reed. I'm a planner with the city, and I'm the preservation planner liaison to the Historic Review Board. Nowhere else in our code do we lay out fees. I think we had this discussion earlier in relation to the conditional use fees. Those are separate from the code. Chapter 2.24 is, that we're talking about is the only place in the code where a fee is codified. And so this amendment would remove that. And the fee would just be reflected in the fee schedule the same way all of our other land use fees are. And then, of course, any change to the fee schedule would have to be approved by the city commission. So the current fee for a historic review board application is $50, for a historic review board appeal is $50, and any change to that would have to be approved by the commission.
And just for edification of the public, the reason that it's been that way for many, many years is that historic review applications and planning commission applications, while they're both quasi-judicial, they really respond to the public in different ways. Historic review has always been looked at as a more hands-on process. It's talking about design issues. There's a lot more give and take. It's always been a little less formal than the regular land use process, even though they still follow the land use process. And that is one of the reasons why the fee was always kept low. And I know staff in the past has argued for that. There have not been that many appeals of historic review board applications over the last 20-year period. And I think that's just reflected in the fact that the historic review board spends a lot of time with an applicant working on resolving whatever the particular issue may be. Now, I still obviously, as a city, we still respect the right of people to come back and say, well, the historic review board's decision wasn't X, Y, or Z, and so they can appeal it. So, yeah, so it's not in there, Paul. I think we're trying to reassure you that it's still the same, and if anything gets changed on that fee structure, as Kelly said, it has to come back to the commission so that we don't foresee that. And if there is a change, everybody will know about it.
Thank you for bringing it up. It was one that I emailed Pete and Laura about, in particular, that removal of that language. So, but it's good to daylight this conversation.
Yeah, and it's just consolidating, because I asked the same question at Planning Commission. What happened to that? Where did it go? And Laura was very thorough in her explanation of where that particular thing went.
Okay. Very good. Mr. Nocita.
President O'Donnell and Commissioners, good evening. My comments are similar. They also relate to the changes in Chapter 2. And I'd like to start out by expressing a concern that this change is even in this process. This process has been noticed to the community of Oregon City for months now as a equitable housing code revision process. That's what everybody in the community knows this process as. This amendment, I struggle to see the degree or how it even relates to equitable housing. And so people don't really know that some significant changes are going on to our historic review board process, because this process has not been noticed as such. And I think that's a grave concern. Having said that, I'd like to express some additional concerns about this. First, in the complete deletion of the appeal section of this code, I think there are some things that have not been brought to the attention of the commission, and I would like to. And if you have the red line version in front of you, mine says page 3 at the bottom. Subsection D says this: the city commission shall hear the appeal pursuant to procedures established in Chapter 1750. Now, the next sentence is critical. The city commission shall consider the record and such additional evidence as may be offered, and may affirm, reverse, or modify the decision. So in Chapter 1750, the record gets closed before the Planning Commission. Once an appeal occurs to the City Commission, no new evidence is permitted. That is an enormous and consequential difference. Then, as Paul mentioned, subsection E says that the fee to a citizen or a business for an appeal from the HRB to the City Commission is $50. That fee was first established in 1980. That code was amended, I think, in 1983 or so, but in the 1980s. And 1750 wasn't even enacted until the 1990s. So this predates 1750. And one of the reasons it predates 1750 is the insignificance of Oregon City as a historic community. And I think Paul alluded to this. The citizen guardians of our historic tradition are going to be severely crimped if this fee goes up. If it's removed from ordinance and is moved over to the fee schedule, that's adopted by resolution, not by ordinance. And the citizens have less protection, both in the number of hearings and the possibility that actually occurred while Commissioner Smith and I were on commission. And I bet Commissioner Smith didn't know this, and I didn't know it when we adopted, but the current resolution that calls for actual attorney's fees, we voted for that.
Okay,
and we weren't told that it was in there by staff.
Mr. Nacid, I'm being very liberal on your time allocation. You've been over for a minute, so please try to wrap up your comments.
Okay. I will wrap up. So I think there are a lot of huge issues whether a fee should be enumerated in an ordinance rather than in the fee schedule by resolution. The amount certainly is something that's critical. There may come a point where a very, very high appeal field gets counterproductive for the city. And I think you all know what I'm talking about. And that whole question of fees needs to be an entirely separate legislative process. It needs to be noticed as such, as an entirely separate process. And all of these very critical questions about amounts, about public process, about transparency, those are huge questions, and it needs to go through a separate process. I would really ask the commission.
I gave you 30 seconds.
I was going to say, please remove this from the agenda or from this process altogether, and then just go to a separate process on fees.
Okay, your comments are so noted. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to call a short break. I need one. Maybe everyone needs one. 5 minutes, is that enough for everybody?
Sure.
5 minutes, and we'll read.
You might have to gavel it in.
Meeting's in session. End of story.
We had one more citizen comment sign up and then.
We had another citizen comment? Who might that be?
Damon, maybe.
Third time's a charm.
No, that'll be the next one now.
Yeah.
Good evening, Damon Mabey. I would have held my comments until like a work session on the shelters, but I work Wednesday nights and I'm taking the night off for other issues. My one concern about the emergency shelters based on the language is kind of a what if. And that is, what if in the Redland area, massive forest fire, lots of people displaced, can't use Redland School, and Red Cross wants to set up a shelter in Holcomb School. And the school district says, okay, it's late August, everybody's on vacation. There's no city council to declare an emergency to make it legal. What's the process for that?
I'm not going to be on vacation.
Well, that's one. We need three.
I am confident that we could do something. If we did it by phone, we could. That's such an emergency.
Well, I understand, but I'm just saying, a year ago, people would have laughed at me for even suggesting an urban forest fire disaster. I think, there might be maybe even if it's by phone, but if the county declares a disaster, contiguous to Oregon City, that would be governing until the council can meet, something like that. Just to, thinking ahead on what ifs and, oh, you didn't declare an emergency, so now you gotta throw them out.
I'm a believer in planning ahead.
Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, if there's an emergency, the city manager or designee has the authority to declare an emergency and then convene the commission when it's available.
Right, exactly. Excellent answer. Proceeding along, where are we at here? We're back in development code amendments. Is there any comments from commission that I've omitted or failed to acknowledge? Okay.
Yeah.
One more, please, if I may.
Please do.
So having spent a lot of time and work on these code amendments. One of the things that the Planning Commission that I had the privilege of serving with specified at almost every meeting was that there were other items in the staff packets that weren't directly related to equitable housing, but also were part of the code cleanup. And we had a lot of discussion about that particular topic, including several of the ones that were brought up already this evening. So I will say for myself, because I can't speak for the other commissioners, there was no attempt by anyone to slide something in that hadn't been noticed or hadn't been discussed ad nauseum at the, Pete should have the number on the top of his head, the 257 sessions that we had on the code amendments. And I see two of my fellow commissioners nodding. We did talk about this. We talked about all the other things that got attached. And I will say that, as I mentioned before, staff was a little miffed at us because we added other things in that were not part of this, but we felt were somewhat related. So I know I went back through some of my red line notes, and this particular topic, not specifically related to historic review, but about chapter 2, was discussed almost to the point of beating the dead horse, because we beat it up pretty good, as we did with just about everything on this. So the code does say, the proposed code or the existing code says that the city may adopt by resolution. It doesn't say they have to adopt fees by resolution. It says they may. And I'm a big may and a shall person. So it doesn't say that we shall adopt it, but it said we may. If we decide that we want to adopt a fee schedule by ordinance, we can do that. That's correct, Tony. We can do that if we want to. So it's not binding us either way, and we may decide to do that. But I just want the public to be assured that, again, I'm confident of all the things that we discussed over and over and over again. And again, thank you, staff, for bearing with us on this, but we wanted to be very thorough and make sure that we didn't miss anything. We did talk about, I know I mentioned to staff about the $50 fee thing in there about historic review. And then Carrie just jogged my memory again, is that yes, that is most likely why it was done. The CLG requirements don't have that in it now, but we still submitted all that to the city to the state when we renewed our CLG requirement. So that's what I wanted to tell you, my fellow commissioners.
Thank you. Commissioner Lyle Smith.
Okay, I would like to return to the topic of alleys. This is page 73 of the red line version of the code. I believe that the reason how we ended up with what we have in this proposed version is to honor the decisions that were made in the concept plan design areas, that it was easiest for us to say, we don't want to require alleys everywhere in the city. We don't want to remove them completely. We want to honor the fact that there were some concept plans that had alley discussions within them. I'm sure I'm not getting all the exact language correctly, but you get the gist.
I think that's generally correct, yes, and have a standard that implements that.
So my concern here is that, so I'll just state, I'm not a fan of alleys, and this code to me reads like it will require alleys in these particular districts that are listed in concept plan areas, and I presume that means all future concept plan areas, so Beaver Creek Road that we're working on right now, or whatever future development we have, this would apply to future concept plan areas?
That's correct. Unless other provisions for access are approved through a land use process. And the stipulations are within those two separate chapters of code that there's an alternative process.
Okay. So
do you have a suggestion?
I'm gonna throw this out there. I would like to honor the concept plans. That was a large part of the discussion, that there were the 2 chapters that we talked about pretty extensively. Respect those concept plans, but can we change this language to make it very specific that these alleys are only essentially required, that shall be provided is saying that they're required in the South End and Park Place concept plan areas?
Add the specific names of the concept plan areas?
So that it's not applicable to all future concept plan areas in the city. So that's my
What
one
would be your
proposal.
recommendation if, let's say we have, the Bamboozle concept plan and it's decided that alleys would be required. So you're okay that we would amend this at some future time to make that applicable?
I mean, if it were up for me, I would remove that. I would remove the requirement altogether, and I would say that alleys are optional, but that isn't where we came to.
No.
Well,
I just
then I guess the alternative is yes, we would have to
Okay,
amend
so I mean,
this
I'm okay with your suggestion because I argued vehemently for leaving it in for the concept plan areas because, again, we owe it to the public process that this is what the public process came out with and this is what they wanted.
Right, and I think that's how we landed with.
Yeah, and that's what we
have.
said. So I just don't want to preclude utilizing alleys as a tool in any other future areas if that's the way it comes through the planning commission or the concept plan group or whatever. I don't want them to be prohibited from making that suggestion. Would that preclude us in any way, Carrie?
No.
Okay, so I'm okay with it.
Commissioner Smith?
I'm okay with it.
I'm okay with it.
I just want to clarify about Beaver Creek. I don't believe that was in there for the specific reason that Beaver Creek's implementation and zoning code is being discussed through a separate process.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll address that when we.
Right.
Because it's coming to us, right?
Are there alleys that are being proposed in?
I don't know yet.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Because I haven't participated in that.
Yeah, me neither.
Okay.
So does staff have clear direction on the comments that were just made by commission?
Yeah.
Can you repeat that, please?
Add
Yeah.
South End and Park Place.
Yep, South End
South End and Park Place. Okay.
Very good. Anything further, Commissioner?
Just a question for Pete on that one. So in all the background materials on alleys says that there's language that allows alleys to not be constructed if certain constraints exist. I presume that's in chapters 1721 and in the concept plan area chapters. Because that language is not here that says
Right.
there's
In
essentially.
1721 and 1722, it talks about that. And
Dealing with constraints
Yeah.
and-
In the public improvements proposed chapter is where the alley standards would exist that refer to those
Okay.
areas.
So my second item, I only have 3 since we've removed shelters. Page 174 of 348. I have a question, and this is to whoever wants to answer it. This is on talking about,
I'm sorry, Rachel, I didn't get your page.
Page 174.
174.
That's what I thought you said, but my brain went
It's
to
on
a
our
different
screen
number.
also.
and I believe this is talking about cottage homes
In this section,
and parking for cottage. I know you changed the word for them.
Yeah, it's crossed out.
Is
Yeah,
JJS?
yeah, the heading on the previous page is for cluster housing.
Okay, somebody jump up and down.
Sorry, I just wanted to make it easier to read.
So the upper section proposed section I, with respect to parking, pursuant to the following requirements, parking shall be provided at a ratio of 1 parking space per dwelling unit minimum and 2.5 spaces per dwelling unit maximum. And that may include shared parking, on-street parking spaces as allowed by the site plan and design review process.
Yeah, so that number 2, I'm wondering why was it removed that shared parking was located on the same property as the cottage development? It's essentially to add on-street as a shared parking option. I thought most cottage home developments that I've seen all had shared parking and all within their development. I was really surprised that we purposefully removed.
I was just kidding.
I could see a situation, considering that cluster housing is going to be going through a site plan design review process, and that includes reviewing any parking areas subject to 1752, which allows for shared parking, certain types of on-street parking in close proximity to the development and possibly within the same cluster, but not in the same ownership parcel. You could have an HOA maintained parking area potentially. And I think they're trying to clarify that here, that it could be provided not necessarily on the same lot as a cluster home, but within the same development or within 1,000 feet of the development, as the parking code currently allows.
And allowing on-street parking. I guess I was surprised when I saw this because I didn't think that cottage, you changed it to cluster, to, what is it, cluster homes?
Yeah, they're
You
going
changed
to
the
be
name.
renaming it from cottage to cluster. Yeah.
So I didn't remember this piece actually coming before us as part of the parking review as far as specific to cluster housing. So I was just surprised.
Okay.
Because we talked a lot about on-street parking versus
Yes,
off-street
street
parking on
Yeah.
a number of housing types. And so this one just caught my attention,
Right.
mainly because it was crossed out. So it clearly says we were removing the on-property
Yeah.
requirement.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it's crossed out and colored black means that it went through the planning commission process without mention, but you're welcome to raise that issue.
I do know that in DuPont, which is kind of a cluster development project, the one that's adjacent to Joint Base Lewis McChord, some of the parking is a little bit a ways from where the particular dwelling is that has its own garage, but I've also seen it the other way too in Portland. Some of the cluster developments where they're co-housing, they have small little garages, and then there is parking one place over into the development, but it's definitely on site. It is not off site.
Yeah, I guess I'm not a big fan of lots of on-street parking, so this one kind of caught me by surprise. And
Are you suggesting a minor change?
I would suggest that we go back to what it originally said, shared parking located on the same property as the cottage development.
I would support that if you feel more comfortable that way. I could go either way, but I would support you on that.
I'd support that also. There's a big difference to me between counting the 22 lineal feet in front of a dwelling versus walking 300 yards to find some shared parking that I have no idea how it's allocated. I'll support what you say.
Okay.
Yeah, so for on-street parking, under the parking code, the requirement is that the street be wide enough to accommodate parking directly abutting the site for that frontage, and it has to be at least 22 feet of available curb. And they don't have a right to it, but they're allowed to get credit for it. So
I understand how it works. I'm still not a fan of on-street parking, so.
I just want to explain what the standard is that relates to on-street parking. So what I'm hearing is that you would prefer that all parking for cluster development be located on-site and not have any provision for shared or on-street.
That's what she's saying.
I'd agree with that statement.
Okay. That's an easy
Mr.
change to
Conklin,
make.
Do you have something to add?
I think I agree with Pete, just trying to clarify that, if you're looking to provide housing units, using.
I understand the
Okay.
argument.
I'm also looking to maintain goal 3, which is livability of the community. So I'm staying with Commissioner Lau Smith's suggestion.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, the last one is, I think, a grammatical change. So maybe, Pete, you can tell me if I'm reading this correctly. Page 202 of 348. This is on mobile food carts.
Oh, boy.
Speaking of items in
I
affordable
think this is
housing,
an easy one.
we need an easy one. Let's do it.
So
It's
this is
zone specific one.
just to be clear, this is the mixed-use downtown district, and we said that as a permitted use, transitory mobile food carts outside of the design district were permitted use. Then when you flip the page and you get to page 202, you get to the prohibited uses.
And it's in there, yeah.
And it's mobile food carts
I
except
caught
with a
that one.
special event permit or transitory mobile food carts. I think that's supposed to, outside is supposed to be saying within. Because it's
Yes.
prohibited within the design district, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, I
That's
caught that one
correct.
too.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's just a grammatical
Yeah.
switch outside to within. And
Good
that's all
one.
I have.
I know a great spot outside the design district that could be for mobile food carts.
No, that's not right.
Can I see the previous page, please?
The way it's written is
The two
correct.
statements are in conflict with each
Yeah,
other.
one says it's allowed, the other one says it isn't, so I caught that as well.
It's kind of confusing when you read it. I had to read it like 2 or 3
Right, I think
times.
there's a couple things going on there.
Yeah,
but-
see where DD is, and then you go to I.
Yeah.
Yeah, DD transitory.
But it's under the
so-
prohibited section.
And the
which-
section is prohibited.
It's like a negative on a negative, right?
Yes, it is. It's a negative on the negative.
Is it? Yeah, yeah.
What are we trying to accomplish, right?
Well, if transitory is defined as under 5 hours in any 24-hour period, and non-transitory is going to go through site. plan.
Transitory are permitted outside the design district.
And then mixed use
Correct.
downtown.
That means
Okay,
they're
so then
prohibited.
we go to prohibited.
Within, right. So it should be
It's-
within the design, or prohibited within the design district.
Of any
With the
kind,
permit, special event, yeah.
Well, let's see.
just mobile food carts.
Dun,
The
dun,
except,
dun.
I think, is
Except with
what's
special
going on.
event permit.
They're prohibited, right? Mobile food carts are prohibited, except with an event permit
So that'd be a farmer's market type thing.
or mobile food carts outside of the design district, right? Isn't that consistent with what it says above is permitted?
It's confusing.
I think it's very confusing.
Yeah, it either,
It should be 2 bullet points.
yeah,
there.
it's allowing it in one, and then you're saying it's prohibited except. You've already said that it's allowed in the prohibited, in the
I mean, with the way
permitted
you read it, it
section.
So I
sounds
would-
right, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so it's almost
I would
like
probably
mobile food
remove
carts except with a special permit, right? And
But
then it
see-
should say mobile food carts within the design district.
right, I was saying
Yes.
change outside, the word outside.
Side to within,
Becomes the affirmative.
right, instead of the negative.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yes.
It's very confusing. Any way to improve
That language.
this prohibited
remove this-
versus,
you could
I
remove it
think
entirely.
the intent is correct. I think it's very confusing and the wording that
When they
except
use-
and within and
Yeah, when
outside.
they use the word except,
Yeah.
It applies to.
it
Became permitted in the prohibited zone.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it should either should say mobile food carts, period, because you're already saying in that zone, it's already allowed on the other part.
Unless allowed per section, blah, blah, blah above.
Right.
So you could remove that line completely and put it back in the permitted use section.
Exactly. That would make it more
That would be a
affirmative
little-
and clearer.
Yeah.
Which
I
it
think
is
that's
in the
probably better.
permitted
Yeah.
use section.
Yeah, but
It's
then
when it
within the
ended up in
design
the
district-
prohibited
Exactly.
use section, it got
With
confusing.
a special use
We do
permit.
need to
Right.
be clear where it's not allowed.
Yes.
Because I
Yeah, I
guarantee
agree.
you, we will be
Yeah.
asked.
You can do it in the design district with a special permit.
Okay,
That's it.
good one.
Then
Thank you.
it's really
Take a look
clear.
at that.
Yes.
You got that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
Maybe
glad it wasn't
calling
just
you.
me. I flipped this back and
No,
forth
I think we
like,
have that. That's good.
yeah. Okay, that's all I have.
After you've seen it 8,000 times, it all starts to look the same.
Any other code amendments to discuss tonight? I believe we're done with that section.
So we need to make a motion, right, to
To
continue?
continue to June 19th.
I'd like to make a motion to continue PC 19-051 Development Code Amendments, including equitable housing, to the next meeting,
Date certain.
June 19th.
June 19th.
whatever the date is, June
June 19th.
19th.
I have a procedural question for Carrie. guess I'm not understanding why we need a continuance if we pulled out the sections that we don't want to, we're going to deal with separately. We can't make a motion to approve everything except that.
Or with these changes?
With make a motion to approve this with the changes and continue it for approval at the next meeting. Because I think we're done with the stuff, except for the stuff that we need to come back and discuss. I mean, I'd like to close the public hearing on everything that we've already talked about, except for the stuff that's being pulled out, and move this to
first reading,
getting it done.
So I have no problem with you closing the public record with regard to everything except for the 3 items that are still for further consideration.
Okay.
And the way we're envisioning this happening is these 3 matters that are still outstanding are going to be identified in the ordinance as not being part of this, right? So the code as it exists today with regard to shelters and heights and short-term rentals will not be affected by the code that you're going to adopt through the first and second reading.
Right.
And so so tonight you're going to continue it for whether you close the record tonight with regard to everything except for these 3 things is fine with me. We're still going to come back on June 19th and with a first reading of an ordinance. So we're going to continue it till then. When we come back with the first reading for ordinance, we're going to come back with a date certain for those other 3 things.
Right.
The reason we're going to do that, so we don't have to do Measure 56 notice for those other 3 things. And so we're going to keep continuing. We're going to keep this process or the file number alive for as long as these 3 things are moving. If these 3 things stop moving, let's say we decide not to do short-term rentals, then we'll stop continuing it.
Okay.
That's the only way I can keep the 3 things alive and allow the bulk of this to take effect.
That's what
after the first and second reading of an ordinance.
That's what I would
So
like.
that's how I'm envisioning the structure working.
Okay.
And so tonight the bifurcation only matters with regard to the record. So you're going to close the record I thought we were going to close the record tonight, but Pete's slides indicated that we were going to take testimony on the 19th. So I'm not sure about how you want to do that. If you're ready to close the record with respect to all things except for the 3. And then we will come back with a ordinance and revised findings. I've read the findings once. I want to give them one more review. And then, and we'll come back with an ordinance for adoption, and then we'll set the date for the continuance for these 3 matters.
That's what I would recommend.
So that's our clarified motion, close the record with the exception of those 3 items.
I had a motion on the table.
Yeah, so either Rachel needs to amend her motion
Either amend it or make a new one.
Yeah, I can amend the motion. I was going off of what Pete said we needed to do, so I wrote it down. That's what Pete needs us to do. So I'm not sure that I know. I'll just withdraw my motion and someone else can make a
Withdraw
motion.
my second.
Okay, well, I would move that we close the public record with the exception of the items involving short-term rentals, shelters, and now I forgot the third one.
Heights and mixed-use downtown.
Heights in the mixed-use district.
You have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Smith seconds. Call for the vote.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Aye.
And President O'Donnell.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, so we
now we need a motion
to continue.
Okay, so Rachel, now you can do your motion to continue.
I'm just doing what you're telling me to do. I'll make a motion to continue for some reason. PC 19-051 Development Code Amendments for Equitable Housing.
Second.
Do we need to add to the motion just for those 3
To June 19th.
To June 19th for those 3 items?
No.
Or for the whole thing?
For the whole thing.
Okay, all right. Got it.
Okay.
Second?
Yes, Rocky seconded.
Rocky seconded.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Aye.
President O'Donnell.
Aye. Does that get us to Buena Vista?
Yeah, thanks so.
Okay, we have arrived at item 7A under general business, 19-341, Buena Vista Club Building Historic Designation.
Buena Vista.
Staff presentation.
Thank you, Commission President O'Donnell and Commission. We're here before you today to continue the conversation in regards to the Buena Vista Clubhouse. And at the May 1st Commission meeting, we received direction from the Commission to reconnect electricity to the structure and to begin to work with the stakeholder group, the Friends of the Buena Vista Clubhouse, to identify a shared scope of work and anticipated expenses and possible phased approach to completing the work that would be required to open up the house as a community space for the public. Part of the conversation that occurred on May 1st was also the request of the Buena Vista Clubhouse, Friends of Buena Vista Clubhouse, to designate the house as a local landmark designation, as well as provide additional information for the Commission on the listing on the National Register. So staff worked with the Planning Department and received a memorandum to identify the processes and steps to achieve local landmark designation, the opportunities, and the obligations that would be required of the city if we move forward with that designation. So today with us, I will turn it over to Kelly Reed, who is our preservation planner, who will outline her memo and be available to answer questions if you have them.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Commission President O'Donnell and commissioners. I'm here as the city's preservation planner to explain the process for historic designation and the opportunities and obligations that come with historic designation. A memo is included in your agenda materials, and I'm going to provide a brief summary of that memo. There are two types of historic designation that may be pursued for the Buena Vista Civic Club building. The first is local designation through our Historic Review Board, and the second is listing on the National Register of Historic Places by the National Park Service. The building has been deemed potentially eligible for listing by the State Historic Preservation Office for its association with early social and civic development in Oregon City. This designation or finding that it's potentially eligible does not obligate listing as historic by the city, and it does not guarantee that designation would ultimately be approved. But it does mean something. I'll talk first about local designation. Local designation is, of course, recognition of the building's significance, and it also protects buildings from being altered in ways that are not historically appropriate, and from demolition by requiring review by the Historic Review Board. Local designation requires an application to the Historic Review Board. Owner consent is required for local designation, meaning Tony's signature would have to be on the application that's submitted. The Historic Review Board uses criteria in our municipal code, chapter 1740, to make a decision, and that decision is appealable to the City Commission and then to the Land Use Board of Appeals. Properties that are locally designated are eligible for a preservation grant program. We have $5,000 a year that we give out in $1,000 grants to historic property owners for improvements to the exterior of the buildings, repairs, restoration projects. Historic Review Board policies and guidelines must be followed for any locally designated structure for exterior alterations or additions to the building. Interior work is not covered by our historic regulations. If designated structures fall into disrepair, the Historic Review Board can find demolition by neglect, which is a code violation and would then be sent through our code enforcement process. Also importantly, local designation is not easily reversible. Once a property is designated, it's virtually permanent. Demolition of designated buildings does occur. It has occurred, but it has to be approved through the Historic Review Board. Second, National Register listing. This is a separate process from our local designation process. National Register listing is largely honorary. There's no design review that comes with it. The process occurs through the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service. Anyone can nominate a building for the National Register, and owner consent is not required for publicly owned buildings. That means the National Park Service can approve a nomination even if a public entity objects to the nomination. Tax incentives are available that are attractive usually to private property owners. Grants, some grants are available for buildings on the National Register, and also waivers to some building codes are available. Demolitions of any National Register listed buildings must be reviewed by the local jurisdiction. So that would come to the City Commission, and the City Commission is required to consider a number of factors. So there's a prescribed process, but no prescribed decision or result. And National Register nomination does not automatically lead to local designation. That's a separate process. Now, if no designation occurs for the Buena Vista building, the city can still meet Secretary of Interior standards and the HRB historic guidelines voluntarily, but the owner, the city, the building would not be eligible for preservation grants. Because the building is deemed potentially eligible, any adverse effects to the building, such as alterations that don't meet historic guidelines or demolition, are required to be mitigated per state statute. And that is the same procedure that the city's following with the Mount Pleasant building currently. So that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have a question.
Commissioner McGriff.
Thank you. Thank you, Commission President O'Donnell. I thought your memo was well-written. There's two things that I think are missing from it is what does the Oregon City Comprehensive Plan say about its Goal 5 resources? And then we also have the whole Goal 5 process, which the City of Oregon City, I know, is in compliance with its Goal 5 requirements. As a matter of fact, we have been a leader in the state in inventorying our Goal 5 resources, which again, and also during my watch, I don't understand how we missed this, but I always thought it was designated, as did many other people. I don't happen to have the comprehensive plan in front of me anymore. I used to have a copy of it, but it's outdated now. And so I'm assuming there is something in our comp plan, which would be, we have our comp plan, we have our local regulations, and then we have our inventory list.
So are you saying you want this brought back with the addition of those two items?
No, I do not. I'm just asking her off the top of her head what our comprehensive plan says about our Goal 5 resources. And then we also have the statewide planning goal, which does, I think in some way, obligate us to inventory. It doesn't say we have to designate, but it talks to us about inventorying our resources and at least identifying them, which again, we have done an excellent job in doing that. We just, for some reason, missed this.
Yes, our comprehensive plan does have goals and policies about protecting historic resources. And part of the criteria that the Historic Review Board uses when making decisions to designate or even when alterations are proposed to a historic building are referenced by the comprehensive plan.
Just want to make sure that the public was aware that we have a procedure and a process in terms of the hierarchy of our documents.
Further discussion by the commission? Additional presentation by staff? Anything further?
This was a request of the commission to bring back information, so we've provided the information as requested, and again, would be happy to answer questions if you have them.
Commissioner Smith.
So one of the, this is a question I think I know the answer to this, but I want to make sure. There was a document that wasn't part of the attachments on the last agenda item, or the last time we talked about this, and that was the letter from the building official that kind of specified the needs of the building in terms of, I'm assuming the estimates that we got were based on that letter, right?
Correct. So the originally when we were approached by the stakeholders group to reopen the house, my initial thought was, well, what do we need to do to open the house?
Okay.
And so I did meet with the building official, and he crafted a letter for me, which kind of outlined what would be required. And so we used that letter from the building official and presented it to firms that gave us estimated bids on the work as would be required, detailed in his letter. The secondary scope, kind of more specific scope of work to meet the minimum standards was crafted by the stakeholders group. So Todd Island created some documents which were then bid out by firms, and that provided kind of the less expensive options that the commission saw during our previous presentations.
Okay. I see there's a public comment request. However, the last time we took that first, it derailed.
It's working.
It derailed my whole focus on it because, quite frankly, the speakers from the Friends group were too nice. So I will say this before, because I want to definitely hear from Damon. But to me, at minimum, what we need to do is designate this as a local historic site or a local, we need to put it onto the local inventory. That being said, I'm willing to go further than that, but knowing that the city doesn't have to be a part of that, if some other group decided to go forward with a National Register nomination, which definitely does not need our consideration, I would highly encourage it. Whether it's applicable or whether it will be approved, I don't know. But I think at minimum we need to have it on our local inventory, if not more.
And to that point, I will say that staff is working with the stakeholder group. They have notified the city community services staff that they plan on applying for the National Registry. And so we're working with them to get interior photos of the facility to help facilitate that work.
Okay.
I guess I'll speak and say my interest is in keeping all future options open and not placing constraints on any potential action. And this is there's a number of telling memos in here. And those courses of action, quite honestly, can be everything from demolition to full restoration. The question is who does what and who pays for it. I probably would not support anything that may potentially limit this commission's choices in the future. Having said that, I know there's another level that we talked about, and I thought the building inspector's letter was the most telling. I don't know if others have read it.
Yes.
But it needs to even bring that up to any form of usage. It has to address very specific things that he enumerated. Specifically, the problem originates because the original closure has no real reason for closure. So so he wants, our guy now says he needs a structural assessment by an engineer, interior environment assessment, fire, life safety, lighting, egress, signage, electrical, plumbing. There's a number of things that when we talked about what's our minimum threshold to get it open. And I'd love to see that assessment done. I don't know how that's to be accomplished. And I think that's the first step by the group. I don't know if we're in agreement on that or not.
That's correct.
So, how we proceed and who does this, I think launching into getting it registered, it seems like we bypass all these other inputs that I think have value. And maybe that's because I'm so methodical and not doing things in a sequence. I know we have an overall assessment coming in by July 30th.
Correct.
Are we making any progress on that?
Yes. We've working with the Friends group.
And we've got a standardized form that we're submitting for quotes so that everybody bids the same package so we understand what we're looking at?
Yeah, that's what we're working on currently.
Okay. So, I mean, I stated my position, and really, quite honestly, it may be not the same as others on this commission. I know we live in a world of competition for limited resources. And when I finally am involved in making this decision, from my perspective, I'm going to weigh all those things. I'm going to weigh the needs of this entire community. So if there is a motion to place this on any form of registry by the city, I can tell you I won't be supporting it. Questions or comments by others?
My comment to you is that getting it on the local inventory doesn't preclude the process of bringing it up to code. And you know, again, without getting into past details, if all the stuff inside of the building had been left in there, all of these, half of these things wouldn't even be on this list anymore. But they were taken out for whatever reason, and the designation locally does a couple of things. Besides being able to access other resources that that the group wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity to access, it does send a little bit of a message to our community that the city is at least willing to put its name on an application and have it go through the process. It still has to be decided by the Historic Review Board as to whether or not it meets all that criteria, and that needs to go through a hearing. So I'm supportive of it going through the process and having the chips fall where they may. Now, saying that, and the fact that SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office, has said that it is eligible, I think is a good point in its factor. And we have a resource, again, one of those hidden gems in Oregon City that is going to need to be watered and planted for the plant to grow and flower and flourish. And this is just one of the many steps that's in parallel going on at the same time. Go ahead. Sorry.
Commissioner Smith?
Let's hear from the...
There are several members of the Friends group that are here.
Public comment? Let's see what we have for speakers. Mr. Maybe. Just stay seated up here until we're done tonight, please.
I do have some comments about the consent agenda while you're at, no.
That's security.
Well, that's my job that I'm normally at, so I guess I'll take
You're going
myself.
to call security on himself.
Please do.
So,
Mr. Maybe.
So David Maybe again. First off, I want to thank Phil. He's been working very diligently with us based on trying to get several schedules together. And we have 4 meetings scheduled on a regular basis over the next couple months. One of the primary things is to get a standard form, so we're comparing apples to apples.
Agreed.
But, you know, the request that we had was that you either permit or direct, I don't know what the authority is, Tony to sign the request for local designation so that it can start through the process. Because if the owner doesn't sign it, it doesn't go anywhere. And local designation does a lot of things, primarily opens up money. You know, there's thousands of dollars worth of grants from federal and state sources, not just the $5,000 that we've got. And some of the required work is fairly extensive. And the other element that we're talking about is minimum required to open the door and final process. And, you know, just as an example, there's no ADA access to the building. Right. So do we do minimal access and build a wooden ramp to get in? Or do we maybe access, you know, $10,000 from an outside grant source and do it right and put a cement ramp in place? You know, that'll be there for 25, 50, 100 years. Well, it's on a hill. It's not going to be there 100 years. Just look at the road that's there right now. But, you know, that's the sort of stuff that we can maybe move some things from just barely getting the job done to getting the job done right. You know, getting the, you know, ADA restrooms in and you know, just the local designation opens a lot of doors. And I'll tell you, no matter what the process is, we're 90% of the way there on the national registration. And we're going to go forward no matter what the city says. So, it's really a case of you can stand at the side and watch the train go by, or you can jump on and go to the bar car with the rest of us. So, it's something that just, it only benefits the city. As we've seen before, when it's up and running, it generates more than it costs. It generates more revenue than it costs to run. So, and it's basically a structurally sound building. We have a few areas where we're in disagreement, but once we get the costing, like minimum to open it, pier footings instead of a solid cement foundation, but that's where we're at and all we're asking is that that the city sign the application to go forward, not that you bang the gavel and designate it here. I don't even know if you can, but we just want we want to have this, let the system do its job, is basically what.
Who speaks for the Friends Group?
I do. I'm the chair.
That's your role sitting here before us tonight.
Yes.
If the city had no interest in pursuing restoration of that building, would the Friends Group take it on? If the city in fact said, I know we bought it for $1 back and whatever, if we say for legal reasons, give us $1, take it and run with it, would there be an interest in that?
Not at this point in time.
Because the financial burden would be.
Yeah, it's
we need money.
But the idea of getting it up and running so that it can be a benefit to the city is, there are other models where Friends groups have taken over some, and they make money hand over fist. And I don't want to take that money from the city, because if that building can help fix the park, which can then generate more money for the building and then be used for new parks, or you can't use SDCs to repair existing parks, so you need funds to do that. And so if that means we fix the playground equipment in Old Kanema Park, and if we do something at God, there's so many parks I can't but anything that they can help the city generate revenue is something that I think the city should want to have happen.
I get everything you said. To me, it's not about revenue generation. It's not about a meeting space. It's a decision as to this building, what to do about it. If we're looking at a return on investment, we don't even have firm numbers. We're making a lot of statements that we really can't justify in the absence of the requirements called out by the engineer here, starting with a structural assessment. What do I have to do to get this up and going? And is that a good starting point? Unpopular though it may be, I'll stand by my position that I'm unwilling to take any steps that limit any decisions we make in the future. And I'd love to have more information on this. I've read everything on this, including the procedure for getting it on the register. I'm not uneducated on it. Commissioner Smith, comments?
Couple of things. One, we have a citizen group who's stepped up, willing to take on, again, a job that's not theirs to do, and are willing to do it, but they also want our support to do it. And I think we have no reason not to support that. Approving or just allowing the process to move forward by signing an application, let it go to the Historic Review Board. Maybe the Historic Review Board, comes back and says, hey, it's not worth it. Maybe they don't. I don't know. We don't know that until we get that answer. The amount of opportunities that come with having that building locally on the inventory, I think, is substantial. Clearly, I think a lot of us assumed it was on the registry originally, and we're surprised sometimes when buildings in Oregon City kind of miss that mark. You have a building here that basically is the only identifying characteristic of an entire neighborhood that no longer exists by that name. That in itself makes it an important asset to the city. And labeling it so. And it can be labeled and on the historic register and sit there just like it has. We don't have to put a dime into it, but we're not going to demolish it. And we can still do that if we really wanted to. So I don't really see the argument that Commissioner O'Donnell's making. All the options are available, even if we label it or not. And speaking about the revenue and having a friends group that's willing to put the time in, and being a member of a friends group who has more than put their time in, I don't want to have this friends group go through what other friends groups in the city have to go through to work with the city. We have the city clearly now working with this friends group. And who are we to stop that from progressing? I think that's a mistake. I think decisions like that add to the frustration of friends group who have already put in more than what their share of time should be. And knowing how many times it takes a no from the city for a friends group or members of a friends group to get furious and stop supporting the city and to stop making progress towards a good goal, it's not worth it. It's absolutely not worth it. And how much time is lost and how much frustration is lost when we actually have, in this case, it seems a partnership that's happening that's actually a good thing. The friends group of the Ermitanger House that is now working with the city very well is got a house that's open, and actually the friends group is generating more revenue than the city is by opening the house, by 2 or 3 times as much. And so, this is not just opening this building at some point, but if the building ever gets open, that's one piece of it. But if we alienate a friends group, that is the next step of that. I think it's a huge mistake. And I think we have made more than enough mistakes in historic preservation in Oregon City. And at one point, we actually should take a stand and actually show that we do care about historic preservation. And not only that we care about maintaining our buildings. Whether they're historic or not, I think, we can go into, I'm still frustrated about how it even got red tagged in the first place. And if it takes a little slap to get it back on the forefront, then that's what we need to do. And I would be very disappointed in anyone up here that's not willing to do that. Doesn't mean you have to, but I really think that you need to think about it. And if you're more comfortable waiting until we hear back in July, maybe that's a consent that I'll make. But I think going beyond that and not designating this building on the local registry is a huge mistake, and it says a lot to the community about what we think about our history.
So again, to be clear, the request is not for the commission to designate.
Right.
The commission has no authority to do that.
It's to authorize the city manager to sign.
The request is to allow the process to occur.
Right.
And again, that's the request, is to allow the process to go through its process. And I love process. I just would like to see it go through a hearing. It's not going to even get on a hearing until July, but it's going to take time to prepare the application. It's going to take time to do the work that needs to be done to make it proper and thorough, to go through all the criteria that the city has and to do it right. And that's why the request was now, rather than waiting until we get these bids, because the bids really it's an independent track. I just want to see us allow for several things to be happening all at the same time. It's not a sequential process. They're all running concurrently. This is happening over here, this is happening here, and this is happening here. And we've got people who are willing and able to put in the time to do all of these 3 things and the 4 things that we got going all at the same time. It's just a request to sign the application. The organization is interested in partnering with the city. We're already partnering. This is just another way of partnering. It's not a guarantee. There is no guarantee in the quasi-judicial process.
All right, I'd like to make a comment because I would love for this item to move on. I think we've about beat this horse to death.
You also have a citizen comment, so it's okay, we'll get it.
I realize that, but I haven't had a chance to say anything yet.
I've been dominating the conversation.
So I'm also going to fall on the unfavorable side of this with Frank. But here's the reason why, and I want to be really clear. I feel like we are working with the Friends Group. We've asked the city to come up with cost. We are still in the gathering information stage. I disagree with you that this doesn't lock us into anything. The memo that we got from Ms. Reed, it doesn't have page numbers, but it does say that the city, if we do a local designation, it would then be required, based on the amount of neglect of the property, to put funds into this building. And I would like us to actually have a plan for this building before we lock ourselves into something. I feel like we're still gathering information. We are working with them. We're showing a partnership, but I'm not at all willing to lock us into expending funds. The reason the Friends Group isn't, they're willing to participate and put all these hours in because they're not the ones on the hook for ponying up $1 million to fix the building. That's just where I stand. I'm not saying we won't revisit this and come back to it in a month and a half or 2 months, but I'm not willing to rush a process because I feel like we are making headway. We're getting more information. That was the request that we made, and we're getting more information. We'll have more information next month, and hopefully we can come up with a long-term plan, or at least present all of the options. Certainly these designations are part of that process. I agree with you. But I would like to see all of our alternatives laid out. And right now we don't have all of that. And so therefore I have no problems waiting another month or two to make sure we get all of our information.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Smith, you wanted to say?
I'm trying to find, so I would like to know where in that memo it states that and the wording, and to make sure that
It's going to be on page 2 at the top. It's on page numbers at the top.
Page numbers are at the top of the page. Page 2, about midway through the page, about the design review implications and protections. The last paragraph in that section about demolition by neglect.
So this, if I may, because it's more than just one sentence in there. I think that the context of the whole paragraph helps. The city has the authority to deny or delay the demolition of a locally designated building. In addition, the city's demolition by neglect ordinance deters the gradual deterioration of locally designated structures by allowing the city to cite property owners for failure to properly maintain designated local historic resources identified in Oregon City Municipal Code 1525. If the Historic Review Board confirms demolition by neglect, property owners are given time to correct the conditions of the building. The board's decision is appealed to the City Commission and then to the Land Use Board of Appeals. Failure to correct the conditions results in code enforcement through the municipal court, which could also result in fines. Since the Buena Vista Club building has been determined to be a dangerous building, if it is locally designated, the city could be required to perform a minimal level of repairs in accordance with it.
that doesn't say required at all.
Yeah, I know we have. I know we have a split
and
vote.
quite honestly, when the city has had buildings that they've let neglected that were on the national register, even they did nothing about it anyway. So I think that
So the 2 months may not make a big difference. Anyway.
And that's where I'm at with Commissioner Lyle Smith. It's a progression. I like what I see here from Mr. Roberts, the building official. What's the minimum we have to do to get to, how do we accomplish that? That was our first discussion that we ever had. If we did that, how do we accomplish that step? And the subsequent step is end of July. What do we do there? Now that's that path that Commissioner is talking about, as far as that's independent of this. I stay by my thoughts about I want total flexibility in our response to this, and I won't support a motion.
Well, two different things in my
Yes,
mind.
they are.
And the argument just given was based entirely on the fact that you wouldn't support a local register because it makes us have to fix the building, and it actually does not, and that's not even what it says in here.
I didn't say it
We
makes
could be required to fix the building.
Right.
But you own the building already. You could be required to fix it, irrespective of
It's
the
our
designation.
responsibility.
That's fine. So I think we'll end up in a circular conversation tonight. Is there a motion?
No,
We have
because
one
we
more
have comments
public
from the public still, so we're not done with this.
Sir.
And I have a comment after that.
I'm Todd Iceland with the Friends Group and also a local architect in town. We have performed a structural assessment of the building, and we have worked with Mike Roberts to develop the minimum requirements needed to reopen this building. In further discussions with staff and the desire of the park system, there is a desire to go above and beyond those minimal upgrades to open it. So we're coming up with two different scenarios right now that we can bid out and get hard numbers on. And that's irregardless of what we're asking tonight, though. We're really asking for the city's authorization to proceed with possible local designation, which will free up some potential grant sources that we're pursuing.
I understand.
It's a 60-day process to get our local inventory. To get on the National Register, we're looking at 6 months plus. And that just delays the project or the potential project further and further out.
So if I read the literature correct, the July is not the drop dead date. There's another opportunity in November. Is that correct?
There's an opportunity in October, but different funds are available at different stages of it.
Okay, understood. I like your approach. I mean, we talked about the minimum level. Again, we're talking about two different things.
There's a minimum and a maximum.
I understand. I don't want to blend the two conversations. There's this registry and there's the path to bring this up to a certain levels of performance.
Right. What we're after tonight is asking for the authorization to pursue a local designation.
Okay, I understand. And again, I said I think we could be in a circular conversation. So if there's a motion, I need to hear it. And if there's not, we'll move on with no action.
I will make a motion to authorize the city manager to sign the application for local registry for Buena Vista House.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it, even though I know it's going to fail. I guess part of
we have a motion and a second.
Yes, my disappointment is that it has always been my goal at whatever local government or state government or federal government that I've worked for is that the cities and counties who are requesting property owners to maintain their buildings to a standard. I hold a city and a local government, I hold this city to a higher standard than I would my neighbor. Now, I hold myself personally to that higher standard as well because I think that in maintaining my own home, I'm just a caretaker. I'm not the eventual owner. I'm not the final owner. Hopefully that when I pass on this house to someone else, my own home, that someone will take as good a care of it as I have. I think that as a local government, we have an obligation, and I say that not lightly, to show our community that we walk the talk. This is part of that. I understand that you want more documentation, and I will agree with Commissioner Smith that I'm not sure how it got red tagged in the first place, and I appreciate Mike's memo. That's the maximum. There are some other things that can be done. So again, if we want our community to step up and do the right thing with regard to our historic resources, and as you know, we are more historic than any other city in this state. We are the industry standard. We are the leaders. We should lead. I would like us to lead. I would like us to show that we walk the talk.
I'll call for the motion, then I have a comment.
Well, you should make your comment before you call for the motion. Because we know it's going to fail.
My comment is this. Very embarrassed, very disappointed in my fellow commissioners. This was definitely an opportunity to show our commitment to our own facilities in this town, whether they're historic or not. But even more so for the historic ones, or ones that are eligible. But my comment is this. I will commit to whatever time needed to help you get this on the National Register. And what's going to be so embarrassing for this city is that this becomes a National Register site before it becomes a local site. Shame on you. But we will do it, and we're going to fix this house.
Call the question.
Commissioner Rachel L. Smith?
No.
Commissioner Rocky Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff?
Aye.
President O'Donnell?
No.
So I'd like this to come back to the commission again for reconsideration.
And I think it can at a future date. I mean, there'll be additional information. And with every passing day, we learn more than we knew yesterday.
Absolutely.
And that was why the discussion was where it was tonight. So, let's see, closing that item. Is there anyone that wishes to pull any items off the consent agenda?
No.
That being said, do I have a motion on the consent agenda?
I would so move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Commissioner Rachel L. Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff?
Aye.
Chair O'Donnell?
Aye.
And we are at the 10 o'clock mark, so I'm not sure if you want to make a vote to extend it to no later than 11, or if you want to just
I'd like to
end the
move that
meeting.
we complete the rest of the agenda
I mean, all we have left is communications and such.
and minutes.
Okay. I just
So the
want to make
minutes on
sure.
the consent agenda?
The minutes were on the
Okay,
consent
then we'll
agenda.
just have 9,
All right, so
A, B, and C.
So we have a motion and seconded, all in favor or call for
yeah.
the vote?
Commissioner Rachel L. Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff?
Aye.
And Frank O'Donnell?
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. Commissioners, we'll start with some updates from Mr. John Lewis.
So 2 items that we wanted to bring to your attention. Attended a meeting earlier this week on South End Road at the county. So the portion of South End Road between, well, it's a few feet up the hill from South 2nd Street, which is, if you're familiar with that, it's right as you come up the hill from 99E,
The one
right
that's
there.
falling off the hill.
Up to
That's accurate.
really Barker. So that whole section of roadway belongs to the county, always has. And if you remember back in 2017, early 2017, we had some slide activity there. They came in and did a temporary repair. They actually got a grant, a federal grant, to do the temporary repair and to look at construction of a more permanent fix. So the meeting that I attended was kind of the kickoff meeting. They've hired David Evans and Associates to do the design work there. They're trying to ramp up their public notice and information on the website about that project. But David Evans also wanted to move right in there and start surveying. So we may see surveyors and flaggers in that area. So we just wanted to give you an update so that if you're asked, you would know a little bit about the fact that that's what that project is. We're going to use their web page update, link that to our social media. So Kristen Brown's going to work to get that information out. But we didn't know that was going to happen as soon as it's going to happen. So
What's the goal of that project? What's the ultimate goal? What's the city's involvement in it?
So they're looking at an area, if you're familiar with the creek.
I am. I drive it every day.
Drive it every day. So the creek crossing right there.
Coffee Creek?
Coffee Creek is essentially kind of the middle of the project. It's a little off skew from that, but they're going down not quite to 5th. A few years ago at 5th Avenue, where 5th Avenue comes out and Sunset crosses right there. They did a soil nail project that kind of secured I don't know, 400 feet of roadway right there. So they're going to start there, not mess with that, and they're going to go up the hill. It goes around the corner past the culvert and the creek. And really, you know, I've been advocating for more versus less, but their scope right now goes probably another 400 feet up the hill from the creek crossing. And yeah, the intent is to stabilize that area, look at more of a soldier pile wall that would essentially that's, you know, that roadway is a man-built roadway, and so it's I think just reestablishing that and securing that area to prevent the slippage that we're seeing right now. The other thing is a lot of that's attributable to drainage, so fix the drainage problems along the roadway as well.
Okay, so it's just informational. They're not asking anything of the city. We're not talking about taking that road or anything like that, making that a city road.
They're always asking for that.
Well, I know, but I know the road has to meet a minimum standard before we even can consider it.
Yeah, I would advocate, you know, that they're basically proposing to put back what's there. I mean, I'd like to see a little more shoulder. I'd like to see, you know, better drainage improvements. It remains to be seen, but I think the message to them has been, you know, the city is unlikely to consider that. Obviously, we'll bring it to you if they make a formal request for that. But, you know, it seems like they need to look beyond what the limited area that they're looking at today.
Thank you, sir. Anything further?
Any other questions about that?
There's not going to be any issues with Coffee Creek. I mean, obviously, it's...
You mean disrupting flow or diverting?
Well, it's a resource. It's, you know, it's part of our Goal 5 resources. And I just want to make sure that they don't do anything to cause any more damage to it than already, I mean, you know, going through the culverts and all of that. But I mean, I know part of it is infiltrating and it's probably causing problems. It's probably why the road is still moving a little bit here and there.
So we're advocating for them to look at the culvert condition. You're going to go to all this work to build a wall and to reconstruct. We're telling them that you need to look at that culvert. They're right now their position is
they don't want to look at it.
No, I think they're willing to look at it, but they're really hoping to avoid the culvert and the impacts to the creek. But you know, that's right in the middle of the slide area. I really kind of find it unlikely that they're not going to be able to, or that they're not going to have to deal with that culvert. So remains to be seen, but they're just kicking off the effort right now. So it's kind of both getting survey and doing the and they haven't even started the geotechnical work. And so all that's kicking off, and we'll track it. But
let's just track it. I mean, as a guy that had a soils engineering class and understands how unstable things can be, they got to go a lot better in restoring it to previous conditions. So we're just bystanders at the moment. Let's remain in that role. Thanks for the information.
I got one other thing to report, which is regarding Malal Avenue and Pearl Street. Just a little bit of history there on, as you probably read in the paper, another pedestrian was hit at that location. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that and kind of some of the things that we're doing. So on April 17th, a pedestrian was hit by a vehicle and killed at the intersection of Malal and 7th, or Malal Avenue and Pearl Street. Police department responded to that. They established that the accident resulted really from a driver who did not notice the pedestrian. We think that as you're parked on Pearl, kind of pointed, I guess it would be westbound, that crosswalk is kind of in your side pillar of your car. And so he just didn't notice a pedestrian, okay? So we went out on the 25th, Public Works staff went out on the 25th, and we did our own little kind of evaluation of the intersection, looking for signage problems, sight distance problems, those kind of things. And we've since kind of produced a report. But generally, the intersection doesn't have any deficiencies, like obvious deficiencies like that. We are making some recommendations that we're trying to pursue with the county, who does our signal maintenance on that. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. We also looked at crash data. So the crash data that we looked at was from 2011 to 2016. and there was really 3 crashes in that intersection. One of them was a bicyclist who, it says, failed to yield to a vehicle. So I think ran the intersection and hit the car. The other 2 were pedestrian actions. One of them is I'm not even sure was in the intersection. I think the police reports are often tied to the intersection, even if they're a few feet from it, because it talked about a phone booth and some other things that really aren't at the intersection. But there was one back in 2011 that sounded similar. It just, the incident report said failed to yield. So then on just recently, May 31st, another pedestrian was hit. It's a young man, or a young boy. 12-year-old. He was injured. I understand he's expected to fully recover, but again, could have been another fatal incident. So Jim's team responded and investigated. The driver was cited for operating a motor vehicle while using mobile electronic device. And so a cell phone. Distracted driver. But really until these 2 incidents, for the most part, that intersection has not had these things. And as Jim mentioned, these things kind of come in waves sometimes. We noticed that at 12th and Washington as well. So, but anyway, during our review, no obvious problem issues were observed. However, a short list of possible modifications was created, which we were scheduled to discuss with the county on June 11th. So things like providing a little bit of time on the front end of the green cycle for the pedestrian to actually get across, at least maybe not across, but maybe across that lane.
Get them to your field of view.
Yeah, right. Get into the field of view. Those countdown activated crossings. There's signage, for the driver to remind them to yield to pedestrians that could go on the mast arm itself. So we think those are things that hopefully in talking to the county, they can implement without too much problem with that particular signal controller. But so we'll keep working on that. I guess we wanted to really kind of encourage driver attention and remind folks about distracted driving and how dangerous that really is. Malala Avenue in particular it's a busy street, right? 20,000 vehicles a day, carries a lot of traffic. So we want to remember people to do that. As a pedestrian who crosses 5th, Malala pretty regularly, it's important for the drivers. It's important as a pedestrian to actually make that eye contact, right? And you could wave friendly to people just to kind of get that wave. Maybe that's a way to deal with that. But definitely eye contact, point at them, maybe get across a little sooner than just some people just kind of meander and take their time. So get across that intersection as quickly as you can. And then a couple other things we're doing. I understand from Tony and Kristen that we're planning to focus the August Trail News on back to school and concerns about distracted driving. So just more reminders that way. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is on National Night Out, together with Jim's crew, we've secured what we're calling a bicycle trailer. The City of Tigard has a trailer with bikes in it. It's really about bike safety, and we're going to partner with another, I think it's Providence, on helmets, inexpensive helmets for kids, and we hope to have a rapid flashing beacon that kids can. So an event, put it that way, that would be associated with National Night Out. So just wanted you to know all those things and express our concern to the families who've been affected by those accidents.
So I'm going to say that my thoughts on this and any other intersection in this city are that our role is to protect the public to the best of our ability. And our role in this case, in any intersection, is if there's engineered in pitfalls, if there's built-in traps that we can minimize, whether it be an audible signal or a delayed light or a crossing, we'll never be able to take the human element entirely out of it. And that's a responsibility that comes with driving, as we all know. But our job is to engineer out those built-in pitfalls. And once we do that, we've fulfilled our responsibility. I don't have faith in signage I was just at Tumwater with all our barricades and don't come up here and it's now closed, and watch people just blow right through that. So I'm not I'm just not a believer in signage. I mean, it's a necessary element, but it doesn't control those who choose to violate it.
I really wanted to say I appreciate your going out and do that and looking at that intersection. And I also have done the same thing because when the planning department was there, I was probably there every other day for some reason. And sometimes I would go northbound, but most times I was going southbound. So right after that first accident happened, I went, they weren't there anymore. So I went there, turned around, came back, got out there, and because I thought maybe the large signal pole might be in the way. No, it's not in the way. There happened to be, thank goodness, a pedestrian crossing. So I just kind of did an observation, and there really is nothing there that's preventing you from seeing anything if you're looking, if you're supposed to be looking as a driver. What I think you said correctly is that I see impatience. I see a lot of tailgating on Malala Avenue because it's not going fast. And this afternoon I was going up to Holmes and the bus was there. Oh my God, you should have seen how many people pulled out and went around the bus, even though it had the shield thing on, like I'm pulling back out. It's just people are in a hurry. And the other thing I wanted to tell you that I've observed is that you have a sign at 7th and Washington that says no left turn. And in the last 5 days, I have probably seen 3 or 4 people turning left at that intersection, which of course, if you get complaints about somebody laying on their horn, that's me. And they look at me like I'm completely insane. So it's the same problem that we're having at the bridge. And I'm coming across on 7th, coming down the bridge, it says no left turn. I've talked to the ODOT folks and said, you need to put it closer so that they see it before you hit that intersection, that there's no left turn because it's way down at the end. They aren't looking up there. They're not looking there. I mean, I know it's there because I see it. But, at least 2 or 3 times a week when I'm on Main going to West Lynn, there is somebody turning left. So it doesn't matter if you put it in their face. They're just not going to read it. They go where they want to go. And our rule at our house is we see something like that, we say, well, that's somebody that the rules just don't apply to them. That's our way to diffuse that, because you just get really upset when you see an accident just about to happen. Because somebody's going straight on 7th to go down to 5th and somebody's turning right in front of them. It's just, I don't want to see that. I know it's going to happen, but I don't want to see that. So you're doing whatever you can.
City Manager, further?
Just one other quick update from Mr. Filders.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I just wanted to give a quick update to the commission in case you get questions from the community. We're beginning the process of doing some survey work at the McLaughlin Promenade. So this relates back to our previous conversations around charter parks and making sure we knew boundaries of our appropriate facilities. And so we will be on site during the month of June doing some surveying. The company has sent out mailers to all the affected property owners adjacent to the park. We've also sent out an additional mailer from the city to notify the residents that we'll have surveyors on site near the property edges to determine the appropriate boundaries of the park location. So I'd be happy to answer questions if you have them. At some point, we'll be able to come back with a ordinance for adoption as the park is a charter park.
Questions from my fellow commissioners?
Question, could you send me a copy of that notice? Because I already have gotten a question about it, and since I already knew about it.
Oh, yeah.
I think the McLaughlin neighborhood, but I think would be helpful for me to have maybe another copy or two.
Yeah, I can send that to the commission.
Yeah, that would be great. And I appreciate it. I will be mentioning it at the neighborhood meeting coming up to say, by the way, this is happening. Great. Just as a question, when that was dedicated to the public back in 1850, was there any sort of description of what it might be? Because I've seen some of those old descriptions and they're kind of
vague.
Yeah, vague would be a good way of saying it.
It was platted on the original plat.
Right.
To my knowledge, there's been no survey work that's been completed to more clearly define the boundaries of the park.
So just the plat shows the approximate location?
Exactly.
The rock next to the 2 trees.
Well, No, I mean that because when I had my own property surveyed, there had been no survey in my section of the original plat since 1844. So I was aware that there might be some discrepancy depending on whether he used the steel rod or he used the rope. Sidney Moss used the rope when he was surveying because it stretched or contracted depending on the weather.
Lastly, just real quick, there was some discussion. Ms. Cole historically has had the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association meetings in the community room at the library. Kenema recently asked to locate there as well. We've accommodated them. Initially said we couldn't accommodate. We're accommodating them through the rest of the year. Ms. Cole is bringing that to the library board. She's invited Kenema, McLaughlin Neighborhood Association representatives to come participate in that discussion. She's asked the library board to look at a policy on how we want to address requests for rooms after hours. Library is closed, no staff. So essentially, Ms. Cole or one of the staff is staying afterwards to open, close while those neighborhood association meetings going on. So we've accommodated that through the rest of the year. Library board will work on a policy. But internally, we also looked at for neighborhood associations, and they do need to do some coordination up front, making sure the room is available, and for the Pioneer Center, securing the key for access. But we've identified both the basement of the Pioneer Center during weekdays can be rented out free of charge to the neighborhood associations, as well as the Oregon City Pool is available on weekday evenings from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock. So we provided this information to the CIC members as well as the neighborhood association presidents for those that are looking for spaces that are available. So far, those are the two city facilities that we've been able to identify that would be available free of charge after hours for them to utilize. That's all that I have for tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Conkle. Anything from my fellow commissioners? Commissioner Smith.
I also have something.
Couple of questions for staff. One is, it seems like we've been given some hints as to maybe a July 3rd meeting, maybe not. Do we know? And when might we know?
What would the commission choose to do?
I'm available, so we can have a meeting. I have no problem with it.
Sure.
I could do it.
Are you available?
I'm available, but I'd like to know whether we're having it.
Well, it sounds like we've got four commissioners available.
Okay. Right now, we don't have anything scheduled. We've been working around it. We can certainly
it doesn't matter to me either way.
I'm good either way.
I'd rather not have to skip one and then double up later on.
So if its schedule works, then it works for just
It's on my calendar already.
I'm fine with it. I mean, it may be one of the readings of the code amendments. So.
All right, we will look at the calendar and we'll send out an email end of the week to let you know one way or the other.
The other question I have is, or I guess we had this letter again tonight. My one thing that I just hope that we're somehow responding to these, because one of the reasons, the question from OC Together regarding marijuana tax and possible use towards public education or youth groups, or some youth education process. I know that Doug Neely has come to us three or four times. I know Brian Shaw has spoke to us 3 or 4 times. I know we've gotten multiple letters. I just don't know if we're communicating to them that this is the process. We've discussed it at numerous occasions. It's going to be on the agenda, but it's not in the budget. It wasn't in the budget process because of these other questions. Are we responding? Do they know that? Because if so, why are we still getting letters? I just want to make sure we're responding to them, saying we're working on this. We're going to talk about it. It's on the agenda for a meeting coming up, something.
Or we're not talking about it and it's not on the agenda or whatever we're doing.
But it is. We
future
clearly
agenda.
said we are going to talk about it. That's all I want to say. I'm just letting them, hopefully they know that. The other thing I want to say is I have, switched classes last week with another teacher who teaches government, and was able to talk to this is the second time we've done it. Last trimester, I talked to one of the government classes, basically had me come in as a guest speaker to talk about city government. And this time around, I was in 4 different classes throughout the day. It was awesome. One, just to kind of communicate to them their questions about city structure and how government works. But a lot of questions from students very interested in the Willamette Falls project, students involved in a lot of different things. I've had my graphic design class working on concepts for Ladderette Park basketball court. So there's a lot of opportunities. We've talked in past commissions. I've been up here where we talked about the ability to tie some connection with students and the youth in Oregon City and have more of a participation. It has never been a top priority. It's not that it's not a priority and not something we consider, but I think anytime we can try to bridge that gap and get students engaged. I told them my story about a lot of students asked me when I first got interested in government, and I told them, actually one of the kids joked that I was 3 years old, and I said, actually I was. And I told them a story, which I won't tell you tonight, but my first instinct is, students, and I think a lot of the general public feel that there is not a process and that there's not a way that they can make a difference. And I told the students one of the things that really hit me the first time I went to a city commission meeting in high school was as soon as the meeting was over, we see this all the time. I try never to do it, but when the meeting is over, I remember sitting out in the audience as a high school student, everybody came up to me and said, well, what are you doing here? Because there was this implication that I was there because I was mad about something, or I was working on a school project, or some other reason other than I just wanted to know what was going on in the city. And so clearly a lot of students are interested, and we're like, what, we can come to meetings? Absolutely. So I think, the more we can communicate that to all age groups too, I think definitely we have a lot more students and youth involved in politics and interest in government and wanting to be involved and have their say. So I think it was a great experience for me. In fact, one of the students asked me why I don't teach government, and I said, I don't know, but I had a great day. It was fun.
Would be.
Enjoyed it.
Anything further from my fellow commissioners?
Yes, I just wanted to report that on May the 30th, I attended the Portland General Electric Willamette Falls Waterfront Redevelopment Open House. It's the first of 2, and I did bring back some handouts, so I was going to hand those out to you because I think the handout sheet is informative and gives a few little facts about our friends on the other side of the river. It basically was a little bit of an overview of PGE's property holdings on the other side of the river and where they would like to go with working with the community to look at the redevelopment. They were very aware of what we're doing. Obviously, we're involved with PG on this side as well. They were surprised and pleased that I showed up from the other side of the river, as they said. What are you doing on this side? And I said, well, I'm here in West Lynn all the time. What do you mean? So I said, if you don't see me at Fred Meyer, I'm at Market of Choice. So that's the other place people hang out and ask me questions. So I just wanted to let you guys know that I had attended that, and I will do my best to attend the second meeting. Also, with regard to my commission responsibilities, I will be attending my first downtown Oregon City Association meeting this month. They had one last month, but I was out of town. But I have met with the president of the board and the staff. So I'm caught up on that, and I will be attending my second Willamette Falls Heritage Area Coalition. They've changed their name, but I don't exactly know what it is, but it's something else now. So we'll have to change our acronyms and initials. And also I wanted to acknowledge that Mr. Lewis Mr. Lewis on my left is doing his due diligence and going to be getting together with the folks at Gaffney Lane Neighborhood Association about Malala Avenue, and I would be more than happy to help you in any way that I can with that. And my last thing is that I have made contact with my former colleagues at the I don't like calling it by the new name, the Portland Development Commission, and I am reviewing some documents that they sent to me with regard to urban renewal advisory committees and the new process that they're using now. And as soon as I can get Lisa to schedule a meeting with me and Tony, I will be forwarding all that information to him and we can start talking about it. So I just wanted to follow up that I'm on it.
That being said, I believe that Commissioner Lyle Smith and I have yielded our time to our fellow commissioners. This meeting is now adjourned.